despite its massive landmass, has only narrow pockets of habitability. If you look at a population map of the two countries, you can almost pinpoint exactly where those areas are. The areas with the best climates usually already have the largest populations. Obviously, though, much of Australia's sparsely populated interior is harsh for the exact opposite reason that Canada's is. Much of Australia is simply too hot and too dry to support large-scale settlement. Interestingly, in the 1800s, as new settlers made their way across the continent, they hoped that further inland would be similar to the other continents. They hoped for lush forests, rivers, and fertile lands. And the only way to truly figure out what was there was to make expeditions into the unknown. As we now know, in many regions, those expectations proved disastrously wrong, and many of the expeditions would end horribly as results. This is the Air Expedition, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. By the late 1830s, South Australia was still a young and growing colony, and large parts of the continent were entirely unknown, or at least to the new settlers they were. These settlers clustered along the fruitful coast and near rivers, but beyond that, knowledge of interior Australia was severely lacking. The maps they had at the time showed features based on little more than
Good night, bro.
guesses, but determining what really lay inland had real consequences
Have a
for
great
whether
day.
Southern Australia could expand further. Like the search for all new land, colonists wanted new grazing land for animals. They wanted new routes that could link settlements, access to new waterways, and the opportunity to find new resources that might support trade. Sea travel was the primary option at the time, but it was slow and expensive, making it all the more important to find viable overland routes from town to town. If South Australia could be connected to Western Australia by land, it would change how people, animals, supplies, and information moved across the continent. At the time as well, many Europeans in Australia still assumed that the interior of the continent might resemble others they were familiar with. There was the expectation of undiscovered rivers, fertile plains, and a large body of water at the center, maybe even an inland sea. But at the same time, all of this was basically speculation. Much of that speculation traced back to the work of explorer Matthew Flinders, who charted much of Australia's southern coastline in 1802. His surveys were accurate, but they were limited by the perspective he had from the deck of a ship. And if you know anything about South Australia, you know why this might be a problem. Along the Great Australian Bight, which is a large open bay on Australia's southern coast, sheer limestone cliffs rise directly from the Indian Ocean. From offshore, it was impossible to see what might lie beyond them, and as a result, that question lingered for decades. If the cliffs were simply the edge of a vast basin, then rivers or even a large body of water might exist just out of sight. If so, it would explain why so few rivers flowed to the southern coast and why rainfall patterns seemed so inconsistent. But there just wasn't enough information to settle the matter one way or another. By the time South Australia was actually established, the uncertainty about the interior had become a problem, and the colony needed answers. Several failed inland expeditions to that point had already shown how dangerous water scarcity could be away from the coast, but the door hadn't fully closed on the idea that something more promising lay further in. In the end, only a successful land expedition could resolve the questions about the interior. Someone would simply have to cross long stretches of the arid country and survive long enough to report back. What none of these proposed expeditions could fully account for, though, was how little margin of error existed beyond settlements. The reality of the interior couldn't have been more different than other continents, and the dangers that lay ahead were concentrated in an area known as the Nullarbor Plain. To understand what a land expedition would be up against, it helps to be clear about what the Nullarbor Plain is and isn't. Most people know of it as a desert, but the Nullarbor isn't a desert filled with dunes and mountains. Rather, it's flatter and much more challenging than something like that. Stretching across southern Australia, it covers roughly 77,000 square miles, or 200,000 square kilometers. It's also largely treeless and arid to semi-arid lands. In fact, the word Nullarbor actually translates to no trees from Latin, if that helps to paint a picture of the vast emptiness of it. At its widest point, it spans more than 680 miles, or 1,100 kilometers from east to west, crossing the border between South Australia and Western Australia. Geologically, the Nullarbor is also the largest exposure of limestone bedrock in the world. It was once a shallow seabed that is now hard and stony in some places and powdery with salt in others. As a result, when it does rain, which is a rarity there, it doesn't linger or pool. Instead, water drains through fissures and underground channels, vanishing below the surface almost as soon as it falls. Even after storms, surface water is uncommon and short-lived, but more on that in a bit. This in itself could be a problem, but the climate adds another layer of difficulty. Rainfall averages just 10 inches a year or less, and much of it comes in irregular bursts. Summers can also reach daytime temperatures close to 122 degrees Fahrenheit or 50 Celsius, while winter nights often fall below freezing. Near to the coast, conditions are somewhat more moderate, and winter rains are more common, but further inland, extremes dominate. As the translation of its name infers, shade is virtually non-existent, and with no trees and few landmarks, the sun reflects off the ground for hours at a time, which intensifies the heat. What vegetation there is offers little comfort too. Shrubs known as saltbush and bluebush dot the landscape, with grasses and flowers appearing briefly after rare winter rains. To the untrained, patches of greenery like this can suggest the presence of water, but this is deceptive. And that difference between expectation and reality misled travelers repeatedly, especially those unfamiliar with how Australia's arid environments function. Some natural water sources do exist, but they are unreliable at best. Wells and pools can be brackish, salty, or completely dry depending on recent weather. And these semi-permanent water holes are very few and far in between anyway, often separated by days of travel. And speaking of travel, while crossing the Nullarbor will undoubtedly wear you out physically, it's known as a mental challenge as well. Because of the flatness, the scenery changes very little over long distances. The horizon stays fixed, making progress in direction difficult to measure and determine. For travelers on foot or horseback, days can pass with no obvious sign that the conditions will improve ahead. Fatigue builds not only from the heat and thirst, but from the absence of visual or environmental cues that promise some semblance of safety or relief. Even today, crossing the Nullarbor by road takes 2 to 3 days at highway speeds. In the 19th century, without roads, engines, or reliable maps, it was an extremely long and daunting stretch of country that few were eager to tackle. By the time plans for another major inland expedition began to take shape, a young man named Edward John Eyre was already well known in South Australia. Funny enough though, he had never set out to be famous. Born in 1815 in England, Edward showed a restless streak from an early age. After completing his schooling there, rather than joining the army or attending university like his peers, Edward emigrated to Australia at the age of 17 with a modest sum of money from his father. He arrived in Sydney with no fixed plan beyond figuring out how to make a life for himself in the colonies. He then tried his hand at farming in New South Wales and learned quickly that success depended on effort as much as the ability to move around. One of his earliest major undertakings came in late 1837 when he set out to drive a large herd of about 1,000 sheep and 600 cattle overland from the Monaro region of New South Wales to the settlement of Adelaide. At the time, this hadn't been done before, but he had livestock to sell and they had to get to Adelaide somehow. The journey took months and required navigating difficult and inhospitable terrain with limited information. When he arrived in Adelaide in July of 1838 and sold the livestock for a significant profit, the achievement earned him attention and credibility almost overnight. This success provided him with financial support, but it also gave Edward confidence in his ability to travel through unknown country. With money in hand and newfound fame, he then turned his attention away from farming and officially became an explorer. In 1839, Edward set out again, this time pushing into the arid Mallee lands of South Australia, which at the time was territory that had seen little European exploration. His work contributed to mapping what would later become known as the Eyre Peninsula, which was named in his honor, and the expedition cemented his reputation as a capable explorer. These early expeditions were crucial to Edward's understanding of the Australian interior. He had seen dry country, salt lakes, and regions that offered little promise, yet he also managed to survive it all in return. That combination of hardship and success instilled a belief in him that he could overcome any environmental challenge. It also gave him a reputation of being willing to volunteer for situations that most would run away from, making him the perfect fit to lead a major overland expedition. The proposed expedition would be exploratory in nature, and among other questions at the center was the lingering idea of an inland sea. The objective was to find out one way or another, once and for all. Edward naturally volunteered to lead the expedition, and he did so with a clear understanding of the dangers involved, particularly the issue of water. As mentioned, previous inland attempts had already demonstrated how quickly expeditions could fail once reliable sources ran out. Edward argued that many earlier failures had occurred because explorers were forced to turn back before they absolutely had to. In his mind, only long and sustained observation across greater distances could resolve the outstanding questions about the interior. The planned expedition would then go on to receive official sanction and financial backing from both the government and private colonists. While Edward was only 25 years old at the time, his earlier success moving livestock and his exploratory work gave him credibility beyond his youth. He was seen as energetic and willing to accept the coming hardships, and those were qualities that served him well at a time when exploration depended more on endurance than any kind of formal training. The journey began in June of 1840, with Edward and his party departing Adelaide and heading north. At first, the route passed through areas that were at least partially familiar to him. These were pastoral areas with grazing land, where previous travelers had left some record of what to expect. Supplies could still be replenished and livestock could still feed on grasses to recover, but this was a luxury that wouldn't last long. As the party moved into the Flinders mountain ranges, the landscape began to change. To the west was an area covered in salt lakes that either blocked their path completely or made it extremely difficult to travel. These lakes were often very shallow, or they looked dry, but actually had a thin crust. Then underneath the crust was a muddy, salty mixture that made it almost impossible to walk through. One of the most prominent of these was Lake Torrens, and honestly, calling it a lake seems almost deceptive. Most of the time, it's a dry bed of white, salty sand that stretches for hundreds of kilometers. When they came upon it, they realized the terrain was even worse than they expected. Then, the Flinders mountain ranges to the east were not much better either. They're not the largest of Australia's mountains, but they're maybe the most barren, so water was just as scarce. As a result of all of this, the further north Edward pushed, the more obvious it became that the interior offered none of the features he had hoped for. Each mile they traveled meant more food and water lost, with nothing to replenish it. Eventually, the limits of this northward push became impossible to avoid. The expedition reached areas near what would later become known as Mount Hopeless, which was an appropriate name considering what Edward was seeing. From that point, progress stalled significantly. The combination of salt flats and arid plains, along with the total lack of fresh water, made any further advancement a bad idea. Continuing north would have meant risking men and animals without any reasonable expectation of reaching better ground. At that point, Edward faced a choice. Returning directly to Adelaide would have made the expedition another incomplete attempt at Australia's interior, so instead he made a decision that changed the entire journey. Rather than retreating along the same route, he turned south and began moving toward the coast. Edward had already determined that a useful route through the northern interior was unlikely, so a coastal route along the Great Australian Bight now appeared to offer a different opportunity for the expedition. After leaving the Flinders Ranges, Edward resupplied at Port Lincoln and then moved on to the town of Streaky Bay, and by late 1840, the party was reorganizing for its next phase. The failed northward attempt may not have gone as planned, but it hadn't shaken Edward's confidence or determination. The coastal route through the Nullarbor Plain, however, would put both those qualities to the test. With the expedition's focus shifted to the southern coast, Edward expanded his party at Streaky Bay. This phase of the journey required logistics that could support long stretches without reliable water, so his group now included both European and Aboriginal men, along with horses, sheep, and carts loaded with provisions. Among Edward's closest companions was an Aboriginal man named Wiley, and his familiarity with the country to the west was critical. The expedition also got support from a government ship named the Water Witch, which followed along the coast. The hope was that the ship might be useful if the expedition uncovered navigable waterways that could be accessed from the coast. The ship also carried the heavier supplies, reducing the immediate burden on the overland party. Finally, in November of 1840, the expedition began the next leg of its journey, and once they moved beyond the settled areas, once again, progress slowed almost immediately. Loose sand and dense scrub made movement difficult for the entire party. The low bushes tore clothing and skin, and sand shifted constantly underfoot and under hooves. Even short distances took time, and each delay increased pressure on the party's water. And this also once again became the defining concern of the expedition. Permanent water sources were rare, and without any local knowledge, many of the wells that existed would have been impossible to find. Thankfully, the expedition had the foresight to bring Aboriginal guides, and they led them from well to well that they otherwise would have likely missed entirely. These nightly finds often made the difference between continuing on and being forced to turn back. By November 11th, the expedition was camped roughly 30 kilometers from what is now Seduna, at the edge of the gateway to the Nullarbor Plain. From there, Edward's party pushed on toward Fowler's Bay, which was the westernmost coastal settlement in South Australia, and reached it on November 17th. At Fowler's Bay, however, the journey had a bit of a snag. The Water Witch couldn't go beyond the South Australian border because there were no viable waterways. With the ship carrying much of the heaviest equipment and supplies, Edward was forced to confront the reality that continuing west would require a smaller, lighter party. So instead, Fowler's Bay then became a staging area for the party to rest and regroup. Edward then began testing routes ahead in short back-and-forth trips. On his first trip, after traveling about 70 kilometers, the group couldn't find water and was forced to turn back. Within days, on the next trip, he loaded a cart with water-filled casks and pushed farther west, covering nearly 100 kilometers. The added water allowed the party to stay out longer, but it came at a great cost. These are some of the hottest areas on Earth, and 3 of the expedition's strongest horses died before they could make it back. Despite these setbacks, Edward still believed a route through the interior might exist if approached differently. He sent the Waterwitch back to Adelaide with 2 men and an urgent request for supplies, particularly feed for the horses, which were looking more and more malnourished. While waiting for the ship to return, he made another attempt inland, riding west with water kegs that he hoped to refill along the way. 4 days into the journey, though, many of the horses gave up entirely, and without the animals, it would be too difficult to continue on. The terrain was too rough to cross on foot with heavy loads, and there was the ever-present issue of water sources being too far apart. At this point, the inland option was effectively tossed out. This caused Edward's strategy to change again. The remaining alternative was to stick closer to the southern coast itself, along the cliffs of the Great Australian Bight, all the way to Albany in Western Australia. It was a risk that would take them through the worst areas of the Nullarbor Plain, but at the same time the coastline provided reference points where the interior had none. On December 18th, he sent the Waterwitch back to Adelaide once more, carrying messages about the change in plans and requests for assistance. From that point forward, the expedition would proceed without the security of the ship following them. By early 1841, the expedition had reduced to what Edward believed was the minimum necessary to move forward. The party left Fowler's Bay with limited provisions, fewer animals, fewer men, and no strong expectation of resupply along the way. Each day's progress would depend on finding enough to drink for the men and the horses to survive another night. And as you might imagine, the journey west was slow as the heat drained energy quickly. The lack of shade meant even rest offered little relief from the sun. Horses eventually weakened as feed disappeared, and water became increasingly scarce. But still, Edward's group pressed on, reaching the bay known as Head of Bight on January 7th. There they encountered an Aboriginal group camped in the area, and they escorted him to Year Choombacabra, a permanent well hidden among the sand dunes. But while this was much needed, the information Edward received next was sobering. He was told that the next permanent water source was roughly 10 days' journey to the west, beyond the end of the coastal cliffs. And even worse, in the interior, there was none at all. The inland sea that had drawn so much speculation and wonder simply did not exist. So, after refueling once more, Edward's party returned to Fowler's Bay to reset, fully aware that the original goals of the expedition could not be met. With hopes of an inland sea finally crushed, all the party could do was continue along the southern coast to Western Australia. On February 24th, a party that had been reduced even further set out once more. Edward, his longtime companion and partner, John Baxter, 2 Aboriginal teenagers named Naremarin and Kudacha, and Wiley, whose ties to Western Australia gave him a reason to continue westward. Along the way, the group buried water casks, intending to retrieve them on the return journey if needed. By March 2nd, they had reached Year Choombacabra again. Soon after that, they passed beyond the end of the cliffs and entered a stretch of country where water was as scarce as ever. As March wore on, Edward responded by lightening the supply load whenever possible, and on March 25th, the party discarded close to 200 pounds of provisions and kept only what they believed was essential to survive. It would take only 4 days before the men drank the last of the remaining water. The following morning, they soaked up dew from the ground and squeezed into cups so they could make one final pot of tea and eat the last of their bread. After that, there was nothing left to ration out. They were still more than 200 miles from the water near Eucla with no certainty that anything lay in between. But there was a problem. By the time they ran out of rations, the way back might have been just as fatal, maybe even more so. This left them with no choice but to continue on. The men marched forward until exhaustion forced them to stop, and days passed with little to no food. The horses deteriorated rapidly as their strength failed, one by one without adequate feed or water. When the weakest of the animals could no longer continue, they were shot and butchered. The meat was then eaten immediately or dried out if conditions allowed. Each of the slaughtered horses bought the men only a few more days, and it was only barely enough to stave off dehydration. Eventually, the party managed to locate a damp pit that led to a deeper well, which partially answered their prayers for several more days. Over the next 3 days, they traveled another 120 kilometers, relying on horse meat to keep themselves going. But this is when the strain of the journey began to create fractures in the group. Shortly after reaching the next well, Wiley and Nurimbaran left the camp as they became convinced that continuing on with Edward would end in death, but they weren't gone for long. Just 3 days later, they returned to the expedition, having found little food or water on their own. The four men then kept trudging along as they were able to across long stretches of exposed country. On April 29th, what appeared to be thunderclouds began to gather, and the men hoped there would be a rainstorm. John urged Edward to stop and camp as he believed rain was imminent, but this decision was a huge mistake. The clouds broke apart before nightfall, and not a single drop of rain fell from the sky. Later that same night, shortly after 10:30 p.m., Edward was awakened by the sound of a gunshot. Nurimbaran and Kudacha had shot John and fled the camp. With them, they took the group's firearms, ammunition, and what little food remained. It's believed that John had likely happened upon them as they were pillaging supplies, and this cost him his life. After John's death, this left just Edward and Wiley. There was no longer a plan beyond continuing west and staying alive long enough to reach a settlement somewhere. Turning back wasn't an option, so forward was the only direction that offered any kind of salvation. And from that point on, Edward depended almost entirely on Wiley's judgment as their days became an endless struggle. They'd walk until movement was no longer possible, then search for water, then rest only when exhaustion forced them to, and repeat. And during this time, it was only Wiley's ability to read land that kept them alive. At times, he would apparently leave Edward resting and return hours later with water. Rarely did he explain how he found it, but Edward knew that without Wiley's skills in the wild, the journey would have ended tragically. The two men did their best to keep moving and eventually reached the coastline, although this offered no immediate improvement in their circumstances. Still, the men pressed on, covering 400 kilometers before finally reaching Israelite Bay. By the time they arrived, they were beyond exhaustion. The remaining horses had supposedly gone 6 days without water, but things were about to change dramatically. The endless limestone they had walked on for months began to give way to vegetation, and for the first time since Fowler's Bay, the horses found some decent grass to feed on. Then, in the middle of May as well, Edward and Wiley found water trickling over a granite slab, marking the first time they'd seen running water since leaving Streaky Bay months earlier. With the horses now fed and hydrated, they were able to ride again, and although food remained scarce, it seemed that the immediate danger of dehydration had eased, at least slightly. Then, just a few more days later, on June 2nd, near what is now Esperance, Edward and Wiley spotted a ship anchored just offshore. It was a French whaling vessel known as the Mississippi, which they managed to flag down. Although they weren't at the end of the journey, this may as well have been it. When they met with the captain, the two men were allowed on board the ship, and they stayed there for 2 weeks while they built up their strength. Apparently, as regular food was reintroduced into Edward's diet, he couldn't help but notice how strange it felt to eat normally again after weeks of deprivation. This was actually so much so that it was physically uncomfortable for him, but compared to what they had endured to this point, this was obviously preferable. Once the two men had recovered enough to travel, they resumed their journey west. The final 450 kilometers to Albany remained difficult, but no longer carried the same immediate threats now that they've been adequately renourished. Winter rains even set in, bringing cold and streams along with it. And while this too was preferable to what they had faced months earlier, the boggy ground slowed their progress. But finally, on July 7th, the two men made it to Albany. This was a moment that Edward saw as much more of a relief than success. The outside world, meanwhile, saw things much differently. Despite failing to locate the storied inland sea or routes for livestock travel through Australia's interior, Edward's expedition was widely recognized. He was awarded the Royal Geographical Society's Gold Medal, and his name became attached to multiple geographic features, including Lake Eyre and the Eyre Peninsula. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Wiley's role received far less attention. Despite being central to the survival of the final phase of the journey, his contributions were only modestly acknowledged compared to the adulation Edward received. Wiley was given a medal from the Western Australia Society and was granted a lifelong government pension, but his name still isn't mentioned with other well-known Australian explorers. In the aftermath of the expedition, Edward would go on to pursue a career as a colonial administrator and hold posts in several parts of the British Empire. He then finally returned to England, where he passed away in 1901. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and a special thanks to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon or as a channel member. If you're interested, we offer early access videos that are released roughly a week before the regular YouTube uploads. Also, if you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it using the form found in the description. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
In my worldview, the Amazon rainforest is the most fascinating and the most mysterious place of the Earth's surface today in the 21st century. It sprawls seemingly endlessly across a vast area of South America, roughly 6 million square kilometers all in. An area of land that's about equivalent to 3/4 the size of the continental 48 United States. The majority of the rainforest, about 60% of it, is all contained within the borders of Brazil. But significant parts of it also extend out across the borders of parts of Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana as well. This huge area of the continent that the Amazon covers is extremely sparsely populated today and rural, with only around 30 million total residents spread out all across it, which is even fewer people today than live in Poland. If the Amazon rainforest was its own independent country, it would be among the bottom 10 countries in the entire world in terms of average population density, with only about 5 human beings per square kilometer on average. But by far, the largest single concentration of people within the Amazon rainforest region today is this random-looking blob of high population density almost in the dead center of it, which is the Brazilian city of Manaus, home to well over 2 million people today. Manaus is the 7th largest city in Brazil, but its weird location in the middle of the Amazon also makes it the most heavily isolated city in the entire Western Hemisphere to have a population of more than 1 million people, as there isn't a single other city of comparable size to it anywhere within 1,000 kilometers in every direction. And so, as you'd expect, actually physically getting yourself there doesn't work like most other cities do. There still aren't any paved roads that connect Manaus to the rest of the Brazilian core thousands of kilometers away to the east. It's theoretically possible to drive from cities like Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro to Manaus, but for hundreds of kilometers along Brazilian Highway 319, the route is currently unpaved, and whenever it rains there, which, believe it or not, is a frequent occurrence in the rainforest, the unpaved road turns into a muddy quagmire with endless nothing all around it. No cell service, and no chance of getting a tow truck to bail yourself out. So that road is a pretty sketchy option to actually take. And even when you get to the other end of the highway close by to Manaus, you'll still have to take a ferry over to the city, since the entire length of the Amazon River still doesn't have a single bridge that crosses over it. The primary actually paved road that connects Manaus to the rest of the outside world runs to the north of it up towards Venezuela, Brazilian Highway 174. This route makes it, at least in theory, sort of possible to safely drive along paved roads to the rest of the Brazilian core. But the catch is that you'd have to travel all the way around through Venezuela, Colombia, and Peru just to re-enter back into Brazil again. Meaning that for most practical purposes, the only ways that most people from the rest of Brazil usually get to Manaus isn't by land, but by airplane or by taking a boat down the Amazon River itself, which is fully navigable to ocean-going vessels for about 2/3 of its course deep into the continental interior. Another similar blob of high population density in the middle of the modern Amazon is the Peruvian city of Iquitos, which is home to around 500,000 people today and is in theory even more isolated than Manaus is. Not because of distance from other large settlements, but because of logistics. Other than for a single 100-kilometer dead-end stretch of road that ends in the nearby town of Nauda, there aren't any other roads at all that connect Iquitos with anywhere in the outside world, which makes it the largest city in the world that can't be reached by road that isn't on an island. Iquitos exists precisely where it does because it sits at about the exact spot on the Amazon River that's still fully navigable all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean, which has always provided a free-to-use and easy-to-use superhighway for Peruvian and Brazilian merchants to take transporting the Amazon's resources out to the global market. Rather than using cars, trucks, or trains, the Amazon River itself provides nearly all of the transportation to the few big modern cities in the Amazon, like Manaus and Iquitos. So much so that when you travel along it, you'll even see floating gas stations and convenience stores for boats instead of cars. And so, as you'd expect, proper road infrastructure throughout the Amazon region is extremely hard to come by, and even the major clusters of people within it don't really have any major roads extending out from them, since the Amazon River is their primary method of transportation and connection to the outside world instead. This means that there are huge swaths of the Amazon rainforest that are completely absent of any roads at all, which makes driving through most of it an impossible feat. while trekking through the rainforest on foot is an extremely arduous process as well, simply because of the unbelievable density of trees here once you get out beyond the major settlements and highways. It's been estimated that there are probably somewhere around 390 billion individual trees densely packed all throughout the Amazon rainforest, which is nearly 4 times as many stars as exist in the entire Milky Way galaxy. A single square kilometer of the forest can contain up to 150,000 individual trees and well over 90,000 tons of plant biomass. A fact that can be clearly seen when you look at images like these ones of the city of Manaus that butts right up against the boundary with the Amazon. On one side, you have a dense city that's like an island of civilization, and on the other, you literally have 1,000 kilometers of super dense, wild rainforest that's mostly just empty of people. So observing what the Amazon's actual surface looks like from the ground from anywhere beyond the Amazon River or from the handful of roads and settlements dotted throughout it has always been very difficult. While for most of modern history, observing what the Amazon surface looked like from the air with aircraft or even with satellites have also been practically impossible because of just how insanely dense and thick the rainforest canopy is everywhere throughout it. As a result, the vast surface area of the Amazon rainforest that lies beneath the canopy we can see from the sky easily contains the largest amount of unexplored, unmapped, and uncharted land area remaining anywhere on the Earth's surface in the 21st century, with some scientists arguing that we currently understand even less about it than we do the surface of Mars. That's why, in my view, it's the most mysterious and the most interesting place remaining on the map in the 21st century. And all of a sudden, very recently, modern advances in the fields of cartography and archaeology, like LiDAR scanning, are finally, after all this time, enabling us to penetrate through the previously impenetrable rainforest canopy to see the Amazon surface like we've never seen it before. And the last blank space on the Earth's surface filled up by the world's biggest rainforest is finally beginning to get mapped out and filled in. And some of the things that we've already discovered down there just over the past decade alone have been so profoundly shocking, they've begun to upend our entire views on history and science in the process. And even more incredible discoveries down there are probably coming very soon. In order to understand why some of these recent discoveries beneath the Amazon canopy have been so shocking, you need to understand what the general historical view on the Amazon region has been within mainstream academia for centuries, how they came to those conclusions, and why they've all of a sudden very recently this decade in the 2020s begun to be proven incorrect. You see, for the past several centuries, the generally accepted mainstream view on the Amazon was that it had always been basically a pristine, largely untouched wilderness environment, mostly undisturbed and unaltered by human beings. This view was reinforced by the fact that for the past several centuries, pretty much ever since Europeans first arrived in the Americas, the Amazon has always appeared to be very sparsely populated by indigenous people in groups no larger than on a hunter-gatherer tribal scale, largely because the soil quality throughout the Amazon rainforest is extremely poor and sterile, and not very helpful for large-scale agriculture that would be necessary for larger, more complex civilizations. But this is a pretty weird thing to consider at first, because it almost seems counterintuitive when you say that the soil quality in the Amazon is terrible for crop farming, while it simultaneously supports more than 390 billion trees in the densest and the most biodiverse forest in the world. But the reason for this is very interesting. You see, one of the primary sources of nutrients for all of the plants in the Amazon rainforest actually comes from a highly unexpected source, far away on a completely different continent. Here at the southernmost edge of the Sahara Desert in central Chad lies the Bodele Depression, an ancient dried-up lake bed that used to be a part of the primordial Lake Megachad until it was consumed by the expansion of the Sahara several thousand years ago. Now, the dried-up lake bed in the Bodele Depression here contains massive amounts of exposed rock minerals composed of dead microorganisms that are chock full of phosphorus, an essential nutrient that fertilizes plants for growth. The powerful trade winds that whip across the Sahara from east to west will then pick up enormous amounts of Saharan dust, including phosphorus-rich dust from around the Bodele Depression, and will then continue carrying all of that dust for thousands of kilometers through the air across the Atlantic and towards South America. where about 28 million tons of Saharan dust will fall across the Amazon rainforest throughout an average year, including about 22,000 tons of phosphorus that was picked up from the Bodele Depression in Chad that provides the Amazon with vitally needed nutrients. But because rainfall throughout the Amazon rainforest is extremely high, these nutrients that arrive from the Sahara are always rapidly washed out from the soil and eventually drained down into the Amazon River itself, which means that the trees and other plants in the Amazon have evolved to essentially pull up the nutrients from the soil about as soon as they're deposited there. Moreover, the very high year-round temperatures in the rainforest and the high humidity levels means that dead organic material like leaves and fallen plants or trees decompose extremely rapidly, which means that their stored nutrients are released and lost very rapidly and reconsumed by other plants and fungi before they can ever be deposited into the soil. This all means that the soils of the Amazon never really gain any buildup of nutrients at all, since all of the trees and the other plants within the rainforest are literally living on the recycled nutrients of all the other trees around them. And so the soils themselves are effectively sterile and useless for agriculture, which is why, historically, most of the scientific community considered large-scale agriculture in the Amazon region to be impossible, which is why they believed that the existence of large-scale, complex indigenous societies within the Amazon were also impossible as well. The prominent American archaeologist Betty Meggers, who specialized in South American anthropology through the Smithsonian Institution throughout the 20th century, was a very well-known advocate of this idea. She wrote a whole book that was published in 1971 titled Amazonia, Man and Culture in a Counterfeit Paradise, in which she argued that without agriculture in the Amazon being possible, the maximum population density that the Amazon rainforest could naturally support through hunting and gathering was only 0.2 people per square kilometer. And so, the Amazon had to be an extremely sparsely populated place throughout its entire history as a result. This view was reinforced over centuries by the fact that European settlers and explorers and their descendants only ever seemed to encounter small tribes of indigenous people in the rainforest, hundreds of which continue to exist across the remote depths of the Amazon still today. In fact, it's estimated that still today, even in the 21st century, the Amazon rainforest is so vast, so remote, and so difficult to access from the outside that there are still around 100 or so indigenous tribes dotted throughout it that remain so-called uncontacted, maintaining their traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyles like their ancestors have for thousands of years with little, if any, contact with the outside world. The Amazon is the host of the largest number of remaining uncontacted people in the world today, and while estimates of their exact numbers are highly varied, it's generally believed that there are around 10,000 of them scattered throughout the rainforest, hiding from the outside world, only observed by us every so often from striking aerial photographs like these ones I'm showing to you right now. But they aren't really uncontacted in the way you think they are. They're pretty much all universally aware of the existence of the outside world and have a very long history of contact with us. But they voluntarily choose to hide and remain isolated in the rainforest because they deeply fear what the outside world will do to them if they're found. Over the past several centuries, since the arrival of Europeans, and even over just the past few decades in recent living memory, countless numbers of these isolated Amazonian tribes have been massacred and enslaved by the outsiders. Across the late 19th and early 20th century, when the importance of rubber as a strategic material exploded, the rubber tree that's naturally indigenous to the Amazon basin correspondingly exploded in value and importance as well, which resulted in an unprecedented surge of European colonists flocking into the Amazon basin to strike out their fortunes, and was the catalyst for the growth of the few big Amazonian cities along the navigable stretch of the Amazon River, like Manaus and Iquitos I mentioned previously. However, as the demand for labor on the growing Amazonian rubber plantations expanded, the European owners of the plantations engaged in massive slave raids on the Amazon's indigenous populations and forced hundreds of thousands of them to work on the rubber plantations in appalling conditions with extremely high mortality rates as high as 90% in some instances, that some historians have compared in scale and brutality to the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide. In the aftermath of the rubber boom in the mid to late 20th century, the indigenous survivors of this genocide in the Amazon fled into the most remote and difficult to access depths of the rainforest, with their memories of the horrors the outside world inflicted upon them passed down through the generations. So, rather than keeping themselves hidden from the outside world because they just prefer to keep their more traditional, simple lifestyles, they really keep themselves hidden out of this very deeply ingrained fear of what the outside world will do to them again if contact with us is ever reestablished. A fear that hasn't helped out very much by the action of loggers, miners, missionaries, drug traffickers, and even anthropologists in recent history either. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, the Brazilian government basically treated the Amazon basin as an empty place full of resources that was holding the country's development back, and the indigenous people within were largely sidelined or even killed. One indigenous tribe in the Rondônia region of the Brazilian Amazon was almost completely massacred by Brazilian gunmen hired by ranchers and settlers there in the 1970s, down to only a single survivor, a man who kept on living a militantly reclusive and distant life in the rainforest for decades up until he passed away from natural causes just a few years ago in 2022. For decades, nobody alive knew anything about the man, not his name, his language, or the name of his extinct tribe. But they well understood his fears and his intense desire to be left alone from the outside world, as he frequently shot arrows at anyone who ever attempted to initiate contact with him for years. He eventually gained the nickname of the Man of the Hole due to the deep ditches he would frequently dig around his campsites for protection. The Brazilian Ministry of Native People discovered him in the late 1990s and eventually fenced off the entire area where the man lived and created a nature reserve out of the area in 2007, which became this isolated island of forest with a lone, uncontacted indigenous man inside of it, surrounded by a sea of deforested cattle ranches, until the man inside died of natural causes in 2022, leaving his unknown tribe's modern genocide ultimately completed. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the Brazilian government tried to establish peaceful contact with indigenous tribes in the Amazon by setting up trading posts in the rainforest with metal tools and other useful objects. But the posts would occasionally lead to violent interactions with the tribes and would frequently spread outside diseases to the tribes that they lacked any immunities to, in a process that has gone on ever since Europeans first discovered the New World a half millennia ago, which will sometimes wipe out half of a tribe's population within only a matter of weeks. These disasters eventually led the Brazilian Department of Unknown Tribes to take a radically different approach starting in 1987, when they decided that isolated tribes in the Amazon shouldn't ever be contacted by the outside world at all unless they, the tribes, voluntarily chose to initiate contact first, creating a sort of real-world prime directive from Star Trek in the process. This was also a part of the late 20th century Brazilian government's creation of the indigenous territories across the country that are heavily concentrated within the Brazilian Amazon, which are currently more than 700 areas set aside for exclusive use by the country's indigenous population, including the Vale do Javari in the far west of the Brazilian Amazon here, which is believed to contain the highest concentration of uncontacted people in the entire Amazon and by extension in the entire world. The territory is roughly the same size as Portugal, and it's completely illegal for any unqualified outsider to enter into it. And it contains an estimated 14 separate uncontacted tribes within it, numbering around 2,000 people all in all, who are occasionally observed by the Brazilian government from the air, which is where most of these striking aerial photographs of uncontacted people in the Amazon have come from. The Vale do Javari itself is part of a much wider area today that's known as the Uncontacted Frontier, an arc of the remote western Amazon region that straddles the border between Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia. That's arguably the single most remote location anywhere on the Earth's surface that remains in the 21st century. Nowhere else in the world today are there more uncontacted people than here, including a highly elusive tribe known as the Choombacabra on the Peruvian side of the uncontacted frontier, around 50 of whom were recently seen and photographed by an organization known as Survival International in July of 2024, during a very rare encounter with the outside world. Because of these very recent photos and this encounter, the Choombacabra are now believed to be the single largest uncontacted tribe remaining in the Amazon and in the world, probably numbering around 750 total individuals. Their location was also notably captured here only a few kilometers away from an active logging company, which Survival International says threatens the tribe's continued existence. Critics of the Brazilian system of indigenous territories argue that they permanently reserve about 13% of the country's total land area to a small population of indigenous people that only make up 0.4% of Brazil's total population. And that much land full of valuable resources getting locked out from development is holding the country's economic development and potential prosperity back in the process. Illegal logging, ranching, and mining within several of the indigenous territories is already a relatively common practice. But the arguments in favor of preserving the system aren't just for the rights of the indigenous people who live there, but also to protect the unknown scale of the biodiversity in the Amazon and the unknown species of plants and animals that are almost certainly still existing there, currently unknown to science. We have understood for a very long time now that the Amazon is by far the most biodiverse ecosystem on the planet. It's estimated that a whopping 1 in every 10 known species in the world lives just within the Amazon rainforest, including at least 2.5 million species of insects, tens of thousands of plant species, and around 2,000 bird and mammal species, along with a whopping 1 in every 5 fish species which live in the Amazon rivers and streams. There's a scientific study from 2001 that concluded just a quarter of a square kilometer in the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador was capable of supporting more than 1,100 separate individual species of tree. The biodiversity of species within the rainforest is so high compared to any other location in the world that brand new Amazon species are still being cataloged by the scientific community just about every single day on average. According to the Brazilian National Institute of Amazonian Research headquartered in Manaus, an estimated 60% of the tree species within the Amazon have yet to be properly cataloged and identified. And there's no telling how many insect, bird, reptile, and mammal species remain undiscovered deep within it as well. Some of the most recent animal discoveries made in the Amazon have been particularly interesting, such as this red-striped monkey that was only discovered in 2015, this species of dart frog that was only found in 1999, this bald parrot that was only discovered in 1999 as well, or this unique species of blind and bright red catfish that was only discovered in the waters of the Amazon in 2007. There's even a huge new species of northern green anaconda that was only very recently discovered in the Amazon by researchers this year in 2024, that could potentially be the biggest snake species in the world, though that's currently unconfirmed. Some Amazon researchers believe that the current pace of deforestation going on in the rainforest is destroying the remaining unknown species hidden there faster than they are being discovered. And there's probably entire species currently going extinct there before the scientific community even becomes aware of them. And there's always the very slight possibility that deep within the rainforest's most uncharted and unexplored depths, there could be exotic large animal species that remain undiscovered as well. One of the biggest examples in recent history of a large, previously unknown animal species getting discovered by the scientific community was the case of the Saola, a large forest-dwelling bovine creature that was only unexpectedly discovered deep within the jungles of rural Vietnam in 1992, and only first photographed in 1993. And the deepest depths of the Amazon are even more remote and difficult to access than where the Saola was discovered in Vietnam, so who knows? There's a very popular legend among several indigenous tribes in the Amazon of a mythical monster that's colloquially known as the Mapinguari. And while descriptions of the legend vary widely from tribe to tribe, there are some who believe that many of the descriptions of it closely match that of the giant ground sloth known as the Megatherium, which used to exist across the South American continent before it probably went extinct sometime around 11,000 years ago. The Megatherium was a giant ground sloth that was about the same size as a modern-day African elephant, and a very recent discovery in 2023 nearby to the Amazon of a set of Megatherium bones modified into jewelry appears to suggest that at some point in history, indigenous people in the Americas used to live side by side with the giant ground sloth, the knowledge of which could have potentially been passed down orally from generation to generation, and eventually became the basis for the modern Mapinguari myth. But that hasn't stopped some people from speculating that the continued reportings of the Mapinguari by indigenous tribes in the Amazon suggest that the Megatherium could still have survived after all this time somewhere deep inside of the rainforest. But that's probably not the most likely possibility, because a creature of that enormous a size would leave behind major signs of its existence, like carcasses, hair, droppings, remains and predator droppings, and much more, that have to date never actually been found. And even though the Amazon is a big and remote place, hiding a creature of that size for this long would still probably be almost impossible. But that doesn't mean it isn't still fun to think about and speculate. If a large, living, extant land animal currently unknown to science was going to exist anywhere on the Earth's surface today, it probably would be somewhere deep within the Amazon, hidden beneath the canopy. And while one of the most fascinating recent scientific discoveries made within the Amazon wasn't of a large, legendary living animal, it was still just about as exciting as one anyway. In 2011, a geoscientist named Andres Russo, who grew up in Peru, Nicaragua, and the United States, had heard legends dating back to his childhood of a boiling hot river that supposedly existed somewhere deep within the Amazon. So that year, he set out on an expedition deep within the rainforest of central Peru to try and see if he could find it. And sure enough, hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest active volcano, he stumbled upon the legendary boiling river, now known to the outside world as the Tempishka, a fully flowing 6.5-kilometer long river whose waters average a scalding temperature of nearly 86 degrees Celsius, or 186 Fahrenheit. Not exactly boiling, technically speaking, but still hot enough to almost instantly kill any animal or person unfortunate enough to fall inside. The local indigenous people had, of course, known about the boiling river in the Amazon for generations. But until Russo's encounter with the river in 2011, it remained completely unknown to the rest of us in the outside world outside of legend. And it's now understood to be the longest and hottest boiling river known in the world. A natural wonder as wide as a 2-lane street and nearly 5 meters or 16 feet deep in places. Made even more puzzling that it isn't volcanic activity that causes the river to get so hot, but a geothermal feature beneath the area instead. And almost a century before Russo's expedition in the Peruvian Amazon revealed the boiling river to Western science based only on hearing about a legend, another Western explorer set out on a series of expeditions across the Amazon based on hearing similar rumors and legends about long-lost civilizations and ruins, hidden deep within the Amazon despite the contrary academic consensus. A British man named Percy Harrison Fawcett. In the early 20th century, Fawcett became obsessed with finding a lost civilization in the Amazon rainforest that he believed existed, and which he steadily began to call the Lost City of Z. Part of his convictions on this lost civilization's existence stemmed from the historical record of early European explorers in the Amazon, like Francisco de Orellana, a Spanish conquistador who became the first European to sail through the entire length of the Amazon River between 1541 and 1542 during his search for the legendary city of El Dorado. During his early voyage through the Amazon, Orellana reported coming across several large indigenous cities that featured dense populations, organized armies, fortified towns, well-developed and maintained roads, and even monumental construction projects. Reporting that for centuries was widely believed to be nothing more than the wild exaggerations of a glory-hungry conquistador. Countless expeditions across the following centuries were made in the Amazon to try and find any traces of these lost cities, but none were ever successful. And the legends of them inspired Fawcett to begin his own expeditions for them in the early 20th century. For nearly 20 years between 1906 and 1924, Fawcett took 7 expeditions throughout the Amazon region in search of his lost city of Z, with a heavy focus on the southeastern Amazon in Brazil and the western Amazon region in Bolivia and Peru. But over all that time, he never ended up discovering anything very substantial. No giant stone ruins, no lost cities, and only small bands of indigenous tribes in little villages. In 1925, Fawcett organized his 8th and ultimately final expedition to find the lost city of Z, along with his son, a friend, 2 horses, 8 mules, and a pair of dogs. They set out for the city of Cuiabá on the edge of the Amazon in western Brazil, and after they crossed the upper Xingu River into the rainforest itself, none of them were ever seen or heard from again, and simply vanished into the vastness of the Amazon forever. Their ultimate fates still unknown to us an entire century later. Fawcett's ill-fated expeditions that failed to find any lost civilizations in the Amazon appear to only further support the mainstream consensus that such Amazonian civilizations never actually existed, and that the rainforest had always been a largely pristine, sparsely inhabited wilderness. But then, several decades later, beginning in the 1970s, a series of steady archaeological discoveries in the Amazon would slowly begin to shift this centuries-long held viewpoint. In 1977, a researcher named Ondamar Dias discovered a series of large-scale man-made geoglyphs within the Acre region of the Brazilian Amazon, in recently deforested land there, while even further discoveries were made by flying aircraft over the region. To date, since that time, literally hundreds of these kinds of complex geoglyphs have been discovered by researchers across the Acre region that have been dated to have been constructed between 1 AD and 1250, which suddenly reignited the interest in the possibility of there maybe being advanced pre-Columbian civilizations in the rainforest that have remained undiscovered. In the Apano Valley region of the Amazon in eastern Ecuador, traces of settlements were discovered by researchers in the 1970s. And then, more clues there began to get uncovered by archaeologists led by Stephen Rothstein with France's National Center for Scientific Research. They began excavations in the area in the 1990s when they began discovering large dugout ditches and even roads that had been long overgrown by the rainforest's foliage. Around the same time in the 1990s, another team of archaeologists led by Michael Heckenberger from the University of Florida began exploring an area in the upper Xingu region of Brazil, very nearby to the area where Fawcett mysteriously disappeared from in the 1920s during his search for the lost city of Z. And they also discovered ancient roads, bridges, and ditches that appear to form the remnants of long-lost walls, moats, and causeways that over decades of hands-on, on-the-ground studying steadily added up to a collection of at least 19 large pre-planned pre-Columbian villages in the region that featured well-planned circular plazas. But researchers still didn't generally consider this to be a truly urbanized area of the pre-Columbian past. None of the discovered settlements here in the Upper Xingu had clearly defined urban centers with monumental architecture you would expect in civilizations, like U-shaped temples or pyramids. And so, they appear to be more of a collection of Amazonian villages networked together rather than any true large-scale civilization. Their discovery, nonetheless, encouraged further searches in other areas of the Amazon, though, such as in the Llanos de Mojos region of the Amazon in northern Bolivia, where on-the-ground research and limited remote sensing studies steadily revealed a similar pattern as in the Upper Xingu region. Dozens to even hundreds of isolated small villages across an area roughly the size of Rhode Island. But even though hundreds of kilometers worth of overgrown canals and causeways were discovered here, and there was abundant evidence of pre-Columbian agriculture and forest management, the logistical problems involved with actually mapping the entire region out in a deeply remote part of the rainforest, shrouded from above by the densest forest canopy in the world, proved to make connecting all of the numerous dots in the region an almost impossible task. And so for a while, it was pretty unclear if all of these small settlements were even related to each other or not. The signs were there of a potential lost civilization in the Bolivian Amazon for decades. But without any clear urban centers discovered in the puzzle, the researchers mostly just had a series of lost villages instead. But all of that would finally and very suddenly change only very recently in 2022, when a team of archaeologists operating in the region led by Heiko Krumers of the German Archaeological Institute released an earth-shattering paper in the journal Nature. His team pursued a different approach that utilized a new key technology that is quickly revolutionizing the field of archaeology and our understanding of what exists beneath the Amazon rainforest. LiDAR, an acronym for Laser Imaging Detection and Ranging. Flying in a helicopter about 200 meters or 650 feet up above the floor of the rainforest, the team used an onboard LiDAR system to shoot down a grid of infrared beams down to the surface that ignore the dense foliage of the canopy, hit whatever is actually down below on the surface, and then bounce back up to the system on the helicopter with a measure of distance in between. As the helicopter flies over the area being surveyed, the LiDAR system steadily creates a colossal number of data points that eventually creates a high-resolution map of the surveyed area without any of the trees being present, which reveals what the area actually looks like. Using this more modern technique, the team led by Krumers carried out LiDAR mapping surveys of 6 different areas in the Llanos de Mojos region that revealed a total of 26 unique archaeological sites in the region, 11 of which were previously totally unknown to science. And 2 of those sites that were revealed were especially interesting, because for the first time in modern history, the LiDAR maps revealed them to actually be very significant pre-Columbian cities, complete with the monumental architecture that had always been missing from countless searches in the Amazon over the past nearly 5 centuries of history. The sites included mud brick conical pyramids that stood more than 21 meters or 70 feet tall, on the scale of several Mayan pyramids known to exist in Central America. and they were shown to anchor a web of sprawling smaller settlements, all connected by causeways and roads that stretched out for several kilometers. And there were even canals and a complex water management system that connected the main urban centers with nearby rivers. The team believes that the settlements were abandoned around 600 years ago, sometime around the year 1400, nearly a century before the arrival of the Europeans for unknown reasons. But their existence finally proved that dense, complex societies within the Amazon rainforest capable of building monumental architecture did indeed exist at some point in the pre-Columbian past, and that the Amazon was significantly more densely populated in the past than previously believed. The Llanos de Mojos region in the Amazon alone, a region roughly the size of England, is now believed to have supported as many as 1 million people before the arrival of Columbus. And it was all right in the middle of many of the areas that were explored by Fawcett's Lost City of Z expeditions more than 100 years ago. Fawcett didn't discover any ruins of long-lost cities in the area because it turned out he was ultimately searching for the wrong kinds of things. The unknown society that built these pyramids and cities in the Amazon of northern Bolivia didn't use stone like the Maya, Inca, or Aztecs did that stood the test of time better and made them easier to find. Instead, they used other natural materials that were more readily available to them in this environment, like mud bricks and wood. So, well, back in their heyday, their cities probably looked every bit as impressive as the Mayan cities do to us today. The materials they used decomposed more quickly over the centuries of abandonment and weren't as durable. So they ended up just blending in far better with the overgrowth of the Amazon that reclaimed them over centuries without human intervention. The discovery of these long-lost monumental cities hidden under the rainforest canopy for centuries in northern Bolivia was the most significant archaeological discovery made in the region for the century. And Heiko Prumers even prophetically predicted that over the next 10 or 20 years, even more previously unknown cities in the Amazon would probably get discovered, that would include some even bigger and more complex than the Llanos de Mojos site. And it would only take fewer than 2 years for him to be proven right. Because just this year, back in January of 2024, another earth-shattering paper was published by Stephen Rothstein and his team that concerned their own year's worth of discoveries and research back in the Apano Valley site that I touched on a bit previously in the Amazon of eastern Ecuador. As I mentioned previously, Rothstein and the French National Center for Scientific Research have been engaged in research in Ecuador's eastern Apano Valley site for decades since the 1990s. And just like in the Upper Zingo and Llanos de Mojos sites, his team had found evidence of small central plazas, raised mounds, pottery, and jugs. Scattered evidence of a potential civilization, but without a complete map of the entire region obscured by the rainforest canopy, it was impossible for them to put all of these pieces together. Everything changed, however, in 2015, when the Ecuadorian government agreed to fund a LiDAR survey of the Apano Valley to finally reveal what was all hidden there beneath the foliage. Over the next several years, Rothstein's team used aircraft and onboard LiDAR combined with extensive ground excavations to painstakingly survey and map out a 300 square kilometer area within the Apano Valley region of the Ecuadorian Amazon. And they published all of their years' worth of findings in the journal Nature in early 2024. And their LiDAR survey mapped out what can only be described as the ruins of a truly lost major ancient civilization that used to exist in the Amazon. Their survey in this 300 square kilometer area, about the same size as the island of Malta, uncovered more than 6,000 individual rectangular platforms that measured about 20 meters by 10 meters and about 2 to 3 meters high, all arranged in groups of between 3 and 6 units clustered around a plaza with a central platform. These were thousands of long-abandoned homes, with areas of especially dense settlement concentrations forming heavily urbanized areas. And one of the structures their LiDAR uncovered within the plaza of one of the densest complexes was a massive 140 meter by 40 meter and 5 meter tall platform, probably the site of long-lost monumental buildings that were used for ceremonies. The settlements were all surrounded by webs of agricultural fields, complete with extensive drainage canals and all interconnected by a huge network of long-lost and unused roads that included multiple impressive features. One of the roads observed by the survey was more than 25 kilometers long, and several of the roads included direct right angles, a difficult engineering feat for any society to have accomplished here in the geographically rough terrain. Defensive ditches were observed blocking some of the settlements from outside attack, and like in Llanos de Mojos in Bolivia, a vast network of causeways and canals were discovered that brought abundant water to the area as well. This discovery in the Ecuadorian Amazon revealed a society that was even denser and more complex than the previously discovered one in Llanos de Mojos in Bolivia, which itself was also an earth-shattering discovery in its own right. Some of the researchers involved have even postulated that back in their prime, the previously unknown about cities, streets, and monuments that the indigenous people constructed here in the Apano Valley rivaled or even surpassed those of the much more well-known Maya civilization in Central America. While the team who wrote the paper on the Apano Valley discovery stressed that estimating the site's previous population is extremely difficult, the paper's co-author, archaeologist Anton Dorsen, suggested that as many as 30,000 people could have lived there at its peak, which would have put it on about the same scale as Roman-era London. Other experts believe that the Apano Valley site could have supported even more people, potentially as high as even 100,000 or so, which, if that's true, would have made it among the largest human settlements anywhere in the world at the time when it was populated. The other fascinating thing about this discovery is that it's believed to be ancient, like really ancient. The team dated the area to be inhabited sometime between around 500 BC at the earliest to sometime between 300 to 600 AD at the latest, meaning that whatever civilization existed here did so for around 1,000 years, along the same rough timeline as the Roman Empire in Western Europe did. By the time the European conquistadors arrived in the Amazon, these ancient civilizations' ruins had already been abandoned for around 1,000 years, and largely left behind to be reclaimed by the rainforest, which is no wonder why it was never rediscovered by anyone until the very late 20th to early 21st centuries. It's not very often that an entirely brand new civilization previously unknown to recorded history gets discovered these days in the 21st century. But that's exactly what the Apano Valley site discovery was, and why it is arguably, at least in my opinion, one of the most important archaeological discoveries of this entire century. The area around this part of the Amazon on the eastern slope of the Andes Mountains has soils that are richer than elsewhere in the rainforest because they've been fertilized by rich volcanic ash from nearby volcanoes, which is also a potential explanation for why the site was eventually abandoned. One of the volcanic eruptions nearby may have been big enough to have caused an apocalypse. But interestingly, small pockets of fertile soils have been recently discovered all throughout the Amazon rainforest by archaeologists that's called terra preta, or black soil translated literally from Portuguese. These pockets of terra preta are now understood to have been man-made. It was created by indigenous people adding a mixture of charcoal, bones, compost, and manure to the infamously sterile Amazonian soil. The charcoal they added would then remain stable within the soil for literally thousands of years, which binded and retained the soil's minerals and nutrients and turned its color into its characteristic black appearance. By doing this, indigenous people were able to create fertile soils out of the Amazon themselves, and modern archaeologists have discovered patches of terra preta all throughout the rainforest over the past few decades, with the probability of this fertile soil type appearing believed to be particularly high along the many rivers and streams located all throughout the rainforest. This all means that the long-held notion we've maintained for centuries about the Amazon being a sparsely populated, nearly pristine wilderness absent of civilizations have been dead wrong. And we're only just starting to understand what could all actually be hidden out there. We now understand that prior to the arrival of the Europeans, the Amazon was in fact a densely populated place that hosted complex civilizations. And there could have been as many as 8 million or more indigenous people living throughout the Amazon around the year 1500. Also at around the same time, it's also now believed that as much as 1/5 of the current Amazon rainforest was an open savanna type environment back then, which enabled Amazonian civilizations and environment to more easily thrive in, that was only taken over by the rainforest in the centuries after the Europeans arrived and caused an apocalypse to take place there. Introduced diseases brought by the Europeans like smallpox and measles, coupled with their own violence, decimated the indigenous populations of the Americas, including the indigenous people of the Amazon. When Francisco de Orellana sailed down the Amazon River in the 1540s, he actually probably did encounter very large Amazonian settlements and organized armies and societies. But over the centuries that followed from that, disease and brutality steadily took its toll on the rainforest's indigenous population, to the point where by the turn of the 20th century in 1900, their population had probably fallen from 8 million in 1500 to fewer than 1 million. While by the 1980s, their numbers crashed even further to fewer than only 200,000 people remaining. Far from being an untouched, pristine wilderness, the Amazon essentially became the world's best preserved post-apocalyptic landscape instead. It was so well hidden by the overgrowth of the rainforest over centuries without anybody left behind to manage it, that we didn't even realize it was a major civilizational post-apocalyptic landscape until, literally just a couple of years ago. This all ultimately means that additional huge civilizational discoveries could be made out there in the future, and the Rothstein-led team that made the massive Apano Valley discovery in eastern Ecuador is already preparing to survey another 300 square kilometer site with LiDAR that's directly adjacent to the 300 square kilometer site that they already surveyed, which could turn up even more history-changing discoveries soon. And as LiDAR is used by more and more scientists and explorers in the 21st century to steadily peel back the foliage that has hidden the secrets of the Amazon for centuries, we will finally start to understand the complete map of the Amazon rainforest in the years and decades ahead. And there's just no telling what future great archaeological discoveries await us there. The rainforest still has a very low population density today, which means that the ruins and relics of these previously unknown Amazonian civilizations have been left almost completely undisturbed for centuries or even millennia. And as a result, the Amazon rainforest remains today the final vast location on the Earth's surface where previously hidden archaeological wonders could still lie, just waiting to be rediscovered again and understood by us. The Amazon will probably be the epicenter of major future archaeological discoveries throughout the rest of this decade and into the 2030s. And you should pay very close attention to all of it because it is all a very, very exciting time. We already know that indigenous peoples in the Amazon grew all kinds of staple crops, from sweet potatoes to maize and others that were traded all throughout the region. But if you're anything like me, you might also be wondering why it still takes so much money and time just to eat more healthily today. The global food supply runs more efficiently than it ever has, but there still seems to be this weird trade-off where you have to choose only two of the following three options with your meals: healthiness, affordability, and quickness. You can have a quick and healthy meal, but it'll be expensive. You can have an affordable and quick meal, but it'll be unhealthy. Or you can have a healthy and affordable meal, but it'll be time-consuming and inconvenient. For a long period in my life, I was really trying hard to figure out the answer to this dilemma by discovering a reliable source of meals that could encompass all three attributes: healthiness, affordability, and quickness. And I eventually discovered and became a customer what ultimately became this video's sponsor, HelloFresh. The concept of HelloFresh is pretty straightforward. You just visit their app or website and select which meals you want to eat, and then the next week, an insulated box will show up on your doorstep filled with all of the fresh, pre-portioned, and partially prepared ingredients you need so that you can home cook your meals way faster than if you had wasted a bunch of time planning your meals out, going to the grocery store and picking out your own ingredients, and then coming home and prepping. Not only that, but you get everything you'll need in exactly the right quantities you need as well. You can also choose from a variety of menu options to suit all your needs and tastes. From fit and wholesome to quick and easy, vegetarian to family friendly, there's something for everyone to enjoy. And HelloFresh knows that your plans might change and life can get unexpectedly busy. That's why they let you easily customize your delivery from week to week as well, allowing you to tailor everything to your own schedule by adjusting your delivery date or skipping a week when you're not able to cook at home. And best of all, the meals themselves just taste really, really good too. That's the biggest reason of all that I've been a loyal customer myself to HelloFresh for years now, and why I've been making meals like this amazing buffalo spice chicken for more than 3 years now. They're just the best solution that I've ever found for having regular home-cooked dinners. And if you want to see if I'm right and improve the way you eat too, now's a great time to do so, because if you want free breakfast for life, you can go to HelloFresh.com or visit the link down below in the description and use code FREEREALLIFELORE. That's going to be good for one free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. And once again, that's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com with code FREEREALLIFELORE. And as always, thank you so much for watching.
Howdy, cowpokes. This is the Act Man here, and today I'm so excited to finally be making Red Dead Redemption 2 videos. I've kept you waiting a long time, and for good reason, because I got an interview with Roger Clark, the actor who played Arthur Morgan. Big deal, big deal. Naturally, I wanted to wait until I did this interview before posting my review series on Red Dead Redemption 2. I envisioned it's going to be a 3-part series. But yes, I was able to score an interview with Roger Clark as part of him and Tori Olson promoting this book called Red Dead's History. Roger does the audiobook version as Arthur Morgan, so, you know, you're in for a ride. While I'm sure many of you are familiar with Roger Clark, some of you may not be familiar with Tori. I'll be introducing him later on. I'll be honest, guys, I was a little bit nervous talking to Roger, and it didn't help that I was also having camera issues while we recorded the interview. However, the audio is perfectly intact, and it's just my camera that fucked up. I'm the problem child. The interview also doesn't contain everything he and I said together. And before you ask, yes, Roger did think it was funny, the outfit I was wearing. With that being said, enjoy the interview. What's up, everybody? This is the Act Man here. And today I got a special guest for all you cattle rustlers out there. Today joining me in a discussion about Red Dead Redemption 2 and its history is Tori Olson.
Hey, what's up, Act Man?
American historian and professor at the University of Tennessee. And, of course, we have the indomitable, the unshaken Roger Clark.
How's it going?
Actor of Arthur Morgan, not just voice actor, full
No.
actor.
No, there's still voice acting, but Red Dead wasn't voice acting. At least not our bits anyway.
I'm like so hyped to be here and talk to you guys that like I gotta make sure I keep it together, you know, because I mean I'm such a huge fan of Arthur Morgan, your performance, Red Dead Redemption 2.
You just gotta be like Dutch. You gotta be confident like Dutch.
Yeah, I
I
gotta
know
channel
you.
his persona.
You can do it. And get the odd voice crack in, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing was that Tori reached out because I had streamed Red Dead Redemption 2. I had just played it for the first time this last year, and he reached out and said, you know, hey, I'm working on this book with Roger. He's doing the audiobook version. I was like, this isn't real. This can't be real.
Yeah, it's real, all right. I really enjoy
Video
it.
games and history, you know, meeting in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, today we're going to talk about that book and a variety of different things. We can kind of just play it by the book. But Tori, I wanted you to introduce yourself first so that my audience can kind of get an understanding of who you are, where you're coming from, and how you guys found yourselves here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ackman, so much for having us on your awesome channel, for bringing us on. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here. Seeing my book on your little mantle there is pretty thrilling, I gotta say. Yeah, so I'm a history professor at the University of Tennessee. I'm in my campus office right now, so you can see the sun setting behind me. I study and teach and write about American history since the Civil War, but I'm also a gamer, and I grew up like a hardcore gamer in the late 90s, playing like all the best first-person shooters, especially that came out. Like, I remember the day Half-Life dropped, and I, went to the store, got it, and had my mind blown really, really hard. So, like, I played a ton of video games in high school, but I will shock you guys and tell you that when I got to college, I quit. Like, I quit cold turkey. Like, I realized on day one of college that I couldn't be a student and a gamer at the same time. So I made this really momentous decision of quitting gaming for a really long time.
You're braver than I am.
Well, I quit right before Halo came out,
Ooh,
so I
bad
never
time.
got to catch that wave, which is a real bummer. But instead, I got serious. Like I did well in school. I got a bachelor's degree. I went to graduate school. I got a master's degree. I got a PhD. And then suddenly I'm a college professor teaching American history in Tennessee. And during all these years, this is literally 20 years of my life, I didn't play games. Like I didn't play Halo. I'll confess, I still haven't played Halo, which is kind of embarrassing, but it is.
I'll cut that out. Don't worry. We'll preserve your dignity.
But what convinced me to get back into gaming was the pandemic. The pandemic jolted so many of our lives off of track. And it got me to buy a gaming PC again for the first time in a long time, and to dive back into gaming. You know, at this point, I'm an established professional, and what's one of the first games that I play? Red Dead Redemption 2. And I pick it up just for fun, but I soon realized, as I know you realize, Ackman, as well, that this is a pretty brilliant video game. You know, it's incredibly well
There's
written.
something to it.
There's something to it. I mean, it's basically an interactive HBO show, right? That's
Right,
like
yeah.
90 hours long.
Yeah.
It's just got really interesting storytelling and such incredible granular detail. And, you know, I'm not just playing as a video game nerd at this point, I'm playing as a professional historian who works in this period. I came to realize that though this game is, of course, fictional, it's certainly way more violent than anything that happened in American history, it is not stupid. It showcases many of the big dilemmas in American history. You know, the women's rights movement, the rise of big corporate businesses like the railroads, Leviticus Cornwall, warfare between the native peoples and the U.S. Army. All those are central to the plot of Red Dead Redemption 2. You guys know this very, very well, right?
Right.
So I had this crazy idea early in the pandemic, like, this game has gotten so many people curious about history. You know, on its own, the game doesn't really teach you the ins and outs and nuances of American history, but it's got a lot of people to ask questions about it. So my crazy idea was, back in 2021, why don't I try to teach a class? Try to teach a college class that uses the fictional content of the games as a way to kind of explore the real dilemmas of violence and, you know, instability in the U.S. and the
I
West
remember
and the
that
South.
news story went viral. Professor teaches class on Red Dead Redemption 2, and I think that kind of says something about like how deep of a game it is narratively. I mean, because you're just talking about like one snippet, one angle of Red Dead Redemption, which is the history and like accuracy and what sort of topics of the time that it covers and addresses, and that's not even like on the topic of gameplay or anything like that, or greater, you know, narrative themes. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was shocked that no one had tried this before. When I gave it a shot in 2021, I thought, oh, surely some other gamer professor has tried this, and nope, they hadn't tried building an actual class around this. So yeah, the news of the class went viral. I mean, it got students here really excited, so they signed up in huge numbers to take this class for the first time. And as soon as the class was done, I thought, well, like a lot of people around the world are curious about how this set of games, I should say, it's not just Red Dead 2, though I do lean into Red Dead 2 a lot more than the first game or Red Dead Revolver. And, I thought, why not turn the class into a book? I'm good at writing books, is what I do, so Red Dead's history. And, very early in working with my publisher, my editor suggested, well, we got to do an audiobook of this, and we should absolutely try to get one of the actors from the game to do the audiobook. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. That's never going to happen, right? That's impossible. Little could I ever guess that the man, the myth, the legend, Roger Clark, Arthur Morgan, in the game.
I do audiobooks. I do loads.
This blew my mind. Like, when I learned that Roger had done more than 100 audiobooks.
Almost 200 now. I'm going to hit 200 this year.
wow, you're really pumping those numbers up, man.
Oh, yeah. Big reader, yeah.
And lots of history audiobooks, especially, and really freaking good history audiobooks. I should note, Roger. I've listened to many of them in advance of working with you. So,
thanks.
but yeah, the day when Roger responded to our invitation to serve on the project, I was just over the moon. I mean, I was freaking out. This is like, they're literally perfect.
I have that same vibe, you know.
It's such a great
book's been
book.
out for a couple of months now, and I still find myself going back and listening to it just to hear the sort of power and resonance that Roger gives to this text. Like, I wrote the text, but like he gives it something that I never had the ability to give it.
Oh, that's very kind. Like I say, a chef is only as good as his ingredients,
The book is available, obviously, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. With audiobook, you get Roger Clark's voice. With the paperback, you only get your internal voice, which, depending on who you are, might be a plus or negative. But Roger, I wanted to ask you, what made you want to narrate this audiobook? You've done a lot. Is it just kind of like for the grind, or was there something that spoke to you about it?
Oh, obviously I was very interested once I found out it was Red Dead related, and I had met, we had done a few things. We gate crashed one of his lectures, which was a lot of fun. Some really wonderful students over there.
He and Rob Weedoff came to my class. My students were not expecting it.
Oh, really? Oh, shit.
Yeah. I told them, I'm like, hey guys, today I'm bringing in some outside experts, and then in walks Roger and Rob.
They actually knew who we were too, which is awesome. Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah. Once you guys opened your mouth, that was very, very obvious. But y'all kind of look like your characters a little bit too. So.
When I was looking at the book, I thought this is really interesting, and there's so much source material that Tori brings to light that you don't think of. Like you were saying earlier, when you're playing the game, I just learned so much. I thought to myself, I've got to, if anything, I've got to finish reading this. I might as well get paid for it.
Yeah, right.
And it's been such a joy. It's been such a joy working on it, and yeah, like all the things that I've learned since, like with Jim Crow and post-Civil War South and Appalachia, even just to know how to pronounce it properly, Appalachia. I learned so much working on it, and it's been a real joy. And to get to know Tori as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about Red Dead 2 as well. Like everyone imagines it's a Western. They watch the trailers, they watch the sort of promo materials, and they're like, yeah, it's a Western like Red Dead 1. And then suddenly you're in New Orleans. And then suddenly you're in like West Virginia. And then you're in like maybe Cuba or something like that, right? It is all over the place. So it allows me as a historian to like shed light on so many big questions in American history, not just Western history, though I do love Western history and I write about it a lot. It's the whole package, it really is.
It takes it down to the deep south, and you're like, is it still a Western? Which is an interesting question.
Yeah.
Roger, I wanted to ask you, just because, like, Tori and I have been talking in a way where it's kind of like we're fanboying a bit. Do you ever get tired of fanboys? I mean, because it's a pretty big deal to voice a character like that in such a, it should have won Game of the Year, but in such a massive game that's like, it's in the cultural zeitgeist, I think, forever. Do you ever get tired of, like, fanboys or anything like that?
No, not at all. Not at all. And yeah, a lot of people come up to me and says, oh, I should have won Game of the Year. Well, we just have to be satisfied with over 60 million copies sold, I guess.
Yeah, somehow you'll have to find a way to sleep at night.
It's not easy, Ackman, but after a couple of years, I've managed to find a way. It's a bit of a moral conundrum, but obviously just to be nominated was an honor, and this game's 6 years old.
Roger did win Best Performance.
Yeah, there you go.
It was a big moment.
This game's 6 years old now, and it still has, people are still coming to me saying, I just finished it. Which I don't think is typical, especially in this world now where we're just flung an infinite source of content at us. And the fact that Red Dead has been able to prevail and is still entertaining fans, I'm very grateful for. No, I never get tired of the fanboys. If anyone is going to take time out of their day to tell me how much they appreciated the work of not just me, but everyone who was on that game, which was thousands and thousands of people, it really took a village, then I'm nothing but grateful. Absolutely. I get asked the same questions over and over again, but I'm happy to answer them. Absolutely.
That's also something I kind of worry about, is like, well, I don't want to ask him stuff that he's probably been asked 1,000 times already.
It's okay.
Well, because in a way that's somewhat relatable to me, as like I have my own audience, and I try to have the same mindset where, if someone's taking time out of their day to message me and they appreciate the work that I've done, I've just got to be nothing but humble and grateful for that.
Exactly. And just to have the opportunity to be a part of something that has kind of entered gaming zeitgeist is just a pure honor, a total honor. And it was a long contract too. I was 5 years working on that game.
So there's multiple angles to like our conversation here. That you obviously have the historical aspect. But history is sometimes kind of a hard sell to people, especially younger crowds, right? You tell them, oh, I'm working on this book about, the economic and political landscape of the United States in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And Red Dead Redemption 2. Well, what'd you say?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll ask this question of both of you. Why do you guys think Red Dead Redemption is that vessel to kind of get people interested in something that's real? Like real history. What was it about the game?
I think immersion has a lot to do with it. It's such a well-written story, and and it's immersive. You know, the difference I often say when you're watching a Western as opposed to playing one is that when we watch stories being told, we're a passive audience members, you know. But when you play a game, especially a big open sandbox like Red Dead 2, you're a participant, you know. Your actions directly impact the way that the story unfolds. And so for me, I think it's the immersion into this amazingly detailed world, which is based on American history, that makes it accessible to a whole new audience. Like you say, a much younger bunch of people, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, from the very splash screen text that opens the game, America 1899, right? It declares its intent that this is a historical game, you know, and that got people excited. You know, sometimes, you know, mentioning a particular date in history will make someone, you know, go to sleep or something, but that not in the case of this. So you know, gamers knew that it was going to be exactly what Roger mentioned, right? This vast, interactive, granular world. But I think what people were really impressed with was not just the level, like the kind of homework that the developers did, right? Not just for like weird details. My favorite weird detail is about the shrinking and expanding horse testicles based on the weather, right? Like that's insane.
I was about to say that, yeah. That's absolutely necessary feature.
Right, so they did weird research on that, but then they did a lot of historical research too, right? So like obviously the developers and writers looked at a lot of photographs from turn of the century America, right? I mean, you look at the streets of New Orleans and the streets of Saint Denis, yeah, of course New Orleans is bigger, but you know, it's almost like a perfect match at times. You look at, you know, a small plantation town like Rhodes with its Confederate memorial, like there's a lot of similarities between that and, you know, some small town in Mississippi in that same time period. So it made a lot of players feel like this is incredibly historically realistic. But what's interesting, of course, is that the developers fictionalized the name of 99% of people and places and institutions. Basically everything except for the Pinkertons is made up. The Pinkertons were real.
And the Pinkertons are the only thing that caused any sort of legal trouble.
Yeah, exactly. So
just shows you what a bunch of bastards they are.
What?
They're still causing trouble for the game.
That's right. So, no, I should note that, like, there are a lot of things that Red Dead 2 doesn't get right. I mean, there's a lot of things that's missing from that world, right? That any person who lived in 1899 would be like, wait, where's politics? Where's the organized labor movement? Where's, you know, so on and so forth. Like, those things are not in the game. So I'm not trying to say that Red Dead 2 is history. It's not, you know, a replacement for reading a history book. But boy, it has gotten so many people excited about learning about the things that it references, right? Learning about Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch, which is, in my mind, most certainly the clearest single inspiration for the Vanderlyn gang. Learning about robber barons like Leviticus Cornwall, right? Like, who was Jay Gould? Who was Cornelius Vanderbilt? You know, these are real people that have real histories that are also tied up to like big problems that are still around today. You know, histories of you know, huge companies that dominate our lives, histories of racial divisions that tear the nation apart. That's an 1899 question. That's a 2024 question as well, right?
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why the games are such a nice springboard into like real history is the characters and archetypes and roles that they fill. I feel like every character in the Vanderlyn gang is part of some either like discriminated group, or they're an outcast, or like a victim of domestic violence, or they're all kind of like a ragtag group of misfits that don't really fit in anywhere else. And I think because they play as an archetype of the types of real people that probably existed in those times, you know?
I think that's something that young people can identify with too, being the outcast. You know, a lot of teenagers, I know I certainly felt that way. But with all the history that it references too, it also references a lot of film and TV and the genre that is the Western, you know? It's the first genre in film. I think The Great Train Robbery was made in like 1900 or something. One of the things I particularly love about Red Dead, and also with Rockstar's other massive franchise, the GTA, is all the little references it does to film. And you're like, I know what film that's from, you know? And Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is a great example. The dynamic between those two, very similar with what Dutch and Arthur have. Even with that jumping off the cliff, that's straight from the film. And there's a lot of other things too, like the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. There's so many filmic references. Even with Arthur's diagnosis of TB, that kind of runs in parallel with Doc Holliday, So it's
They're
this
drawing
big,
from so much.
it's this big hodgepodge mixed mesh of
I've come
reality and fiction, and I think it's done very well.
I've come to realize that late 19th century British literature was a huge inspiration too. I was fortunate enough recently to have a Zoom call with Dan Houser, who is one of the lead writers on the game, and he discussed how things like Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes and Charles Dickens, huge inspiration for some of the storytelling in the game too. So it certainly film and history and TV shows, but there's a lot of old books in there too.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of references and a lot of stuff I probably haven't gotten. You can play those games for eons, hours and hours and hours, and still not discover everything. One thing I do find very interesting about the character of Arthur Morgan is how he's like the antithesis of your typical Western hero. So while the Western period is often romanticized in American culture, they got the gruff hero cowboy who basically remains the same by the end of the story as he is at the start, or maybe he gets stronger. But Arthur is like the opposite. He starts off at his strongest, and over the course of the story he gets weaker and weaker, as if his style of life and the frontier and the Wild West is dying within him as it is in the outside world. I felt that was interesting thematically.
Yeah, absolutely. Westerns, when they first came out, there was very black and white morality going about, and the good guy always wore a white hat and he did everything that was right, and then when Clint Eastwood came along and with those spaghetti westerns that came with it, we started to see more of an emergence of the anti-hero, the badass who could just as easily murder and kill but still had their own moral compass, and I think Arthur definitely falls into the latter category, but again, he doesn't quite fit it perfectly either, because as you say, when we share the journey with him and he gets sicker and sicker and it changes his whole perspective on life, and he sees the writing on the wall, and yeah, his sickness and dying is totally a metaphor for the West, because that's what's happening as well. The West is dying as we play the game, and it's a huge source of conflict. Some people see that its time is coming to an end, and other people refuse to, and that's where a lot of the friction thematically comes from. But I always really liked that Arthur, once he does have his morality staring at him in the face, he starts to show some vulnerability. And for me, I never saw that in a Western before. I mean, Unforgiven kind of touches on it lightly, because it addresses the huge dilemma it is to take someone's life, and I thought it really dealt with that in a very interesting way. And we hadn't seen Westerns explore that before. But with Red Dead 2, we see Arthur, there's one conversation where he admits that he's scared of dying. I'd never seen a protagonist in a Western say that before. So I was really keen to explore that. I thought that was really cool.
That's also, I think, a fan favorite scene. Like I said, I live streamed the entire game, and so I had people in the comments being like, no, you gotta talk to Sister Calderon. And I was like, why? What's the big deal? I'm just like, no, you gotta get.
You don't do the
scene,
Brother Dorkins missions in Saint Denis. You don't meet her, and then instead it's a whole different scene where you have Reverend Pearson there instead. And you might not know this, but there is a high and a low honor version with Reverend Swanson, not Pearson, Swanson. It's not that different, but there are slightly different dialogues.
Yeah, how was it recording and acting for basically two sides of the same character? I was always curious about that, because I know what you're talking about with the scene, the two different versions. I think if you're low honor,
three different versions. So it's kind of mathematical in a way. Yeah, especially towards the latter half of the story, there would be different scenes depending on which way the player decided to conduct themselves as Arthur, and it was the high honor and the low honor. But when I would get specific pages, okay, this is for when he's high honor, okay, that actually made it a little more simpler. But the real challenge was when the scenes were the exact same. Maybe it wasn't as big of a scene for the story, and they wouldn't write two different versions. And those were the cases where it posed a unique challenge, because I had to, in the back of my mind, be aware that this scene now is the player is either good or bad. So I had to come up with an ambiguous enough version of Arthur so that it would fit either way. And that was an interesting challenge. But it's often you draw out these mathematical equations to see where this story branches out depending on what decisions the player would have. And it did get a little confusing at times, but we had a really good team. We were good at it. We figured it out, I think.
I mean, the end result kind of speaks for itself, you know.
I hope so. Yeah, and the fact that people are still enjoying it now just blows me away.
Yeah, I've been working on a series of reviews of the game in which I'd go really in depth on Dutch, John Marston, and Arthur. So like kind of 3 character studies, and it's really difficult to like try to compile all of the different voice lines and get the full picture of the story because there's just so much of it.
Which voice lines were those? There weren't voice lines. Yeah.
Right.
I've been saying this for 20 years. No, there weren't voice lines. Some of the smaller NPC characters would have done just their work in the booth, but it's full performance capture. So we perform, it's just like what you would do on film, except you're wearing spandex and you look ridiculous.
And then they turn you into an ultra badass in the final.
We would wear
product.
spandex, but we still had boots so that our gait and our walk was right, and we'd have gun belts. Every once in a while, we might have a hat, depending if we interacted with it or not. But yeah, we looked pretty crazy. The GTA 5 guys, at least they looked a little more normal because they weren't wearing cowboy boots. They'd just be wearing sneakers, you know? But we've had spandex with all the balls on, and then cowboy boots and these crazy gun belts. And
Which also meant you had to memorize all these lines. I mean, all the ones that were not in the booth.
It's just like
that's
film.
Insane.
It's just like
film.
Yeah, they are 3 incredible, huge arcs, those 3 characters, Arthur, John, and Dutch. And in many ways, Dutch's journey is even more crazy than in many ways, what Arthur and John go through. Because we see Dutch at the beginning of Red Dead 2. He's a good leader, you know? He's a good guy. He's someone that you get behind and believe in.
You have faith in him.
And then we see him at the end of Red Dead Redemption with the friggin' femur bone in his room, you know? Like talks of cannibalism and how you get from A to B. But Benjamin Byron Davis and the writers did such a good job that you believe it. You do believe this crazy journey that he takes, being this iconic, rebellious leader to arguably a sadistic cannibal who just is a mass murderer, you know?
And he's just lost his mind. I would like to talk about Dutch because I was reading part of Red Dead's history, and there was something you wrote, Tori, that kind of like gave me an epiphany. Dutch Vanderland's endless dreaming of Tahiti and Cuba to replace the closing American frontier illustrates this instinct. There's some, context before that, but that kind of made me realize like how much the Wild West and the American frontier is romanticized in our culture, and like how people must have had to adapt back then when it's like, yeah, the expansion is over, like we're now we got to civilize all these places and turn it into what's on the east. And the way that Dutch kind of loses that, like expansionists are like, yeah, we're just gonna go west, it kind of like breaks him. He doesn't know what to do. And I think that's like where the true twist is, that he never had a plan because there was no plan to get the frontier back.
Right. No, I mean his dilemma is not his alone. Many other Americans, particularly well-to-do white men in the US, they share that same crisis. Like, if the frontier process is what made America great, which they would have argued in the 1880s and 1890s, what's going to happen when the frontier is filled? Take someone like Teddy Roosevelt. Like, Teddy Roosevelt is obsessed with the West. He's not a Westerner. He's totally from New York City, right? Like, he's totally a city slicker from the East. But he would have, if he was born more recently, he would have loved Red Dead Redemption 2. I can promise you that. But he's so fascinated, with his very romantic and really problematic view of the West, that sees it as this playground for guys like himself. Of course, there were a lot of people in the West already, right? Whether they're native peoples or Chinese immigrants or other settlers, who had less money and resources than him. But, when he believes that the West is closing, he's like, we got to go somewhere else, right? We got to push the frontier outward, or else America is going to, stagnate and collapse upon itself. So he doesn't go to Tahiti, as far as I know, but he's really fascinated with like Cuba, with the Philippines, with Panama and the Panama Canal. So like it really inspires him to become an American imperialist, right? Someone who's going to push America's might and resources abroad because he wants a replacement, of the West, like something else to rejuvenate what he saw as manhood and vigor and the robustness of American, well-to-do white male identity like himself. So I'm just trying to imagine Teddy Roosevelt playing Red Dead 2. I want him on your stream somehow. Someone resurrect him and put him on the Ackman's show. I wonder what you guys would talk about.
What's the verdict on using AI for dead presidents?
I don't know. His estate might
That's a tough question.
his estate might put the Pinkertons on you.
Yeah, it's not a tough one for me. Yeah, California's now passed a law. You're not allowed to do it without their consent. I hope the rest of the country follows suit very quickly. Because what's going to happen now is, and it's already happening, is, these elderly people are getting phone calls from their grandkids. All you need is about 5-10 seconds of audio sample to do it. And then they're posting $2,000 to some Venmo account to help out with the bail money.
Ooh.
So, yeah, I mean, AI has got some really, really useful tools, and it's here to stay. There's no arguing with that. But when it's used to replicate, either characters or real people without consent or permission, that's not a difficult stance for me. I'm dead against it.
Really? I can't imagine why. But how do you feel, Roger, about fans who make their own fan edits with AI and post it to like YouTube? Do you find that along the same lines, or are you talking more of like using AI to replace workers and voice actors and full actors?
Well, I struggle to see the difference. I think impersonations take far more talent. AI, you're typing into a prompt. I mean, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Although in some ways it can be an original idea, it doesn't really take any skill whatsoever. So yeah, I'm not a big fan.
People,
I'm not a big fan.
For me, right, big fan of Dutch, John Marston, Arthur, right? So what you would be saying is like, hey, work on a good impression and then do it that way, as opposed to taking the easy way out.
So.
Yeah, I can respect that. I want to ask you guys both a question. It's a very simple one. Was Arthur Morgan a good man?
Ooh, that's not simple. It depends on how you play him, I guess. I don't know if he is at the beginning. I mean, he's definitely loyal. He's always loyal to a fault. But I guess it depends on your Arthur. I guess it depends on the way you play him. God knows, I sure did create a few mountains of cops in Saint Denis once I found a nice little corridor,
That they all funneled through?
Yeah, and then, oh dear, my honor's gone down, so then I'd catch a few fish and throw it back again, stuff like that. I guess it depends on how you play him. And that's some of the beauty of the game, is that you have that freedom. But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't automatically say, yes, he's a good guy. His perspective on life definitely changes once he realizes that he's going to die. And I think it changes for the better. But whether he's a good guy or not, I think it totally depends on your playthrough, which I think is kind of cool.
Even if you were to do like the highest honor playthrough, could you still say he's a good man? Because there are certain things that you as the player don't have control over, right?
For example, I will note that the minimum number of people that a high honor Arthur Morgan kills is about 900.
Yeah.
I saw someone tabulate this online, and that number really shocked me. I mean, I'm not that surprised because I've done
They're all
that.
bad people, Tori. They're all.
Yeah, those were all bad.
To be honest, the first time I played Red Dead Redemption 2, remember, I haven't played video games for like 20 years, and it's when you go to Valentine, and you're basically forced to beat the crap out of some random dude in the bar. I was like, oh, what is this game? Where's the moral center of this? Arthur Morgan is a horrible person. And I actually was thought about quitting. And a friend of mine talked me into it. He's like, no, the moral arc of the universe bends toward Arthur Morgan, toward, his redemption, if you will. So I stuck with it, and I came to realize that, yeah, despite the 900 bodies, by the end of the game, he's a really fascinating, really, intriguing, and maybe even good individual.
He pays the price for his actions, He is held accountable for his actions, to some extent, at least. But yeah, to say that he's good, certainly at the beginning of the game, that might be a bit of an oversimplification, yeah.
Yeah. My idea is that Arthur Morgan wasn't a good man, but he did his best to become one, and that is commendable in and of itself. When reality was facing him, he didn't turn away from it. he embraces it and does his best to take care of the people he cares about.
And if you were to ask him that,
So-
he doesn't think he's a good man either. He's even at the very end, he doesn't think he's a good man. So yeah, it's a fair point.
Let me give my historical pitch as to why I think Arthur Morgan was a good man. Because no matter how you play the game, basically, you are a ally and defender of people who are on the margins of society, particularly women. Think about the suffrage crusade that you help protect, and people of color in the game, African Americans, Native peoples, right? Like the Wapiti. I don't think you could do the main story missions and break with that. And that
Right.
1899 is a moment when ideologies of white supremacy are really, really instilled and central to American society, right? The very few people questioned them, white people, I should say. Some did, like Arthur Morgan, but he would have been on the kind of margins in doing so. He would have been in the minority, and that's awesome, right? Like the fact that when you run into that eugenicist, that guy distributing all those pamphlets, about breeding in Saint Denis, like I'm pretty sure you have to punch him.
Yeah, if you do, you don't. That's one of the few people in the game, I think, if you do shoot him, your honor doesn't go down.
Them and the Klan.
Yeah.
And if you try to beat up the woman, the woman's lib, she's tough as nails. She's like almost as bad as that dude with the raccoon hat in the Valentine bar. Yeah, he's tough. He's tough as nails, and he's cussing everybody off. But once you get that raccoon hat knocked off his head, man, that's...
Oh, he falls apart. I have a funny story about that part of the game, because you go around going greet, antagonize, and I antagonized him, and then I sat down to get a haircut, and I was there customizing my hair for about 5 minutes, and then I'm like, all right, cool, and then I get up, and then I just immediately get clocked by the guy with the
What?
raccoon
He
hat.
started on you? That's weird. Oh, man.
Yeah, well, because I antagonized
fair
him, and then I think he was
Just
sitting there
waiting.
waiting for me to finish the haircut, and he was like, I'm gonna get him.
That was considerate of him, at least. Nice of him to wait.
Oh, yeah. He destroyed me, but, I had a fresh cut. Roger, I wanted to ask, when you got the job as Arthur, did you know what you were getting into? Did you envision how long the process would be?
So, no. I didn't even know it was Red Dead at the very beginning. I was suspicious, but I wasn't sure. It was only really on about the third audition where I was like, this is Red Dead, isn't it? And they're like, yeah. But the first audition, it was what they always are. It was called Untitled Video Game Project. They all have the same name at the very beginning. And all they said was to wear boots and to practice on a Western accent. But just by pure serendipity, I just happened to finish Red Dead Redemption about a month before. So that was still very fresh in my head. And I was a huge John Marston fan. I mean, he's the OG. So once I actually realized what the franchise was, then I did feel a little bit of pressure, because I knew how much, spoilers, but I knew how when you play as Jack at the end of Red Dead Redemption, you can't help but miss John. And I knew that once Arthur was announced as the playable character in Red Dead 2, that there was going to be a lot of people who were going to be disappointed. And I totally understood that, So all I was really hoping for and expecting was that it might take as long as GTA 5 did, which was about 3 years. And I was just hoping for it to be as successful as its predecessor. And thankfully, I think we achieved that. But 5 years working on it, being under an NDA, I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword because obviously you work in complete isolation. You can't talk about it with anyone. And that, in a way, it was good in the sense that, we had blinkers on, and it was just pure focusing on the work. And we couldn't talk about it with anyone except each other. So we all got really in depth into the scripts, and we were all, for lack of a better term, we all made sure that we were on the same page and whatnot. But the other difficult bit is that you can't talk about it with anyone. And I was just telling my friends and relatives, I'm working on a video game. I can't talk about it. And then
How many times did you have to say that?
After 4 years, they started going, you still working on that game, Raj? How long's it been now? It's okay if you're out of work. You don't have to lie, we still love you. I mean, we know what being an actor's hard. I'm like, okay, yeah, fine.
You were telling them, no, just one more year, guys. Just one more year, one more
Whatever
score.
you say, Raj. Yeah, that was fun. And then when the trailer dropped, I got a couple of funny phone calls, that was sure. But I still couldn't confirm it until the day of release. That was when I was finally
Right.
That was when most of my NDA got lifted. But yeah, I was just hoping that it would be as successful as the first Red Dead, and thankfully, I think we achieved that. Yeah.
Yeah, that you actually answered one of. I had some viewer questions, and somebody asked what it was like trying to remain secretive under the NDA, and you just answered that. So, hey, Malik, that one was for you. I can't imagine working on a project that massive for that long, and also having to be completely silent about it and not be able to like spill the beans.
I'm kind of glad in a way, as well, because had it been public knowledge that we were working on it, I think that might have been even more pressure, because I probably would have been.
People would have started snooping,
these emails and phone calls and stuff, and people would have been. I'm in a way, I was glad that I was grateful for the NDA because we were able to concentrate on the work a lot more. And of course, NDAs is such a funny thing, but at the end of the day, we just don't want it to be spoiled for the fans. That's really the big reasons that you don't want the fans to get spoiled ahead of time, and it's so hard to do now. We keep seeing with like Naughty Dog and with the GTA 6 trailers too getting leaked. It's I feel so sad because I know how hard the devs work, and we shouldn't see it until it's ready to be seen. But yeah, NDAs, a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's way better to like have those trailers kind of pop out of nowhere and surprise everybody all at once, because then we all have a similar reaction, as opposed to oh yeah, this is gonna leak soon, and then Rockstar has to they have to change course on how they're doing things to accommodate this unforeseen.
The first time I saw the trailer, it had some fella's Instagram thing just across the. I'm like, oh, this isn't the way it should be seen,
Yeah.
But so that is the world we live in.
I feel like if Dutch lived today, he would be doing crypto
He
scams.
might be, yeah, definitely. Him and Hosea would be in on that too, maybe.
Yeah, they'd be doing crypto scams.
I hear the Tahitian government is very protective of those kinds of policies, so it might be a good place to do it.
Yeah. That seems like a good place.
El Salvador uses Bitcoin as its national currency, doesn't it? Or it's one of their legal currencies. Maybe that could be, instead of going to Bolivia like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid did. Although they went to Bolivia in the film, right, Tori? But where did they actually go? Was it Uruguay?
They spent more time in Argentina. So they buy a ranch in Argentina. There's so many weird parallels between Butch Cassidy and Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, and Arthur and Dutch, that it's kind of creepy. If folks haven't already watched the 1969 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, it kind of feels like a weird 60s Red Dead 2 trailer.
Almost.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check that out when I have a moment, because I was reading a book and it sounds like it's very similar to the Vanderlyn gang.
But the real gang, because it's based on reality, is even in many ways more like the actual the video game gang that you see in Red Dead.
Butch is the silver-tongued mentor, and the Sundance Kid is got about 15 years younger, and he's the guy with the fast gun and whatnot. So many dynamics shared in that story. Yeah.
So I had a couple questions about Dutch and Arthur's relationship, because we talked about his character and some of the deeper themes behind that, but it seems like what we were talking about is Arthur took care of a lot of those outcast, marginalized people. So maybe it was Dutch's influence on Arthur that was the cause of all his negative personality traits, or his meanness. What type of man do you think he would be if Dutch was taken out of the equation?
That's a good question. So I definitely think that Dutch and Hosea were Arthur's mentors. They were his paternal figures, and they were two very different figures, Hosea in many ways was the voice of reason, more so than Dutch. Dutch was the silver-tongued, leader who would rely on charisma a lot more than morality. And Hosea, he also had charisma, but I think he had much more of his own moral code going. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we see the gang really start to disintegrate once Hosea departs, because that angel over Dutch's shoulder disappears and gets replaced by Micah, as we know. There was no angel at all. So without Dutch's influence on Arthur's upbringing, I think Hosea would have probably taken the mother load of influencing him, and he might have ended up being. I don't think Hosea would have betrayed him in the ways that Dutch did at the end. It might have been a better relationship. They might have survived. They definitely would have put more of a priority on survival than what Dutch was trying to do, which was just get a lot of money and get the hell out of here. You know, Hosea was, I think, more focused on making sure everybody survived. And yeah, that's a good question.
I think Hosea has much more of a moral backbone. He's more what I'd call a social bandit, like someone who's interested in stealing but has a real sort of redistributionist vision. Like he wants to see it go to the right people. I mean, I just can't, like that's one of those very early missions when the gang is descending from the mountains down into the prairie, if you will. They run into these two mounted Native Americans on horseback, and Hosea like suddenly begins this like long analysis of like land theft, and like Dutch would not do that, right? Like Dutch, he gestures toward the kind of Robin Hood style stuff, but ultimately he wants money for himself, right? Like that's Hosea's different. I really think he is.
Hosea is just like, guys, why are we robbing banks? Let's just scam people. It's safer that way. Like, let's just do the crypto scams. We don't have to do the full bank robbery.
If you played as Hosea, I don't think you would kill 900 people. It'd be a lot less.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be for sure. So, and then banking off of this topic, do you guys think Dutch was a narcissist? Because there's a lot of debate in the community. I read a lot of like fan theories and interpretations. One of the things I really love about these games is not everything is like explicitly stated. So, was Arthur a good man? That's something you can ponder and think to yourself. Was Dutch a narcissist who really only cared about himself? Roger, earlier you were saying he was a good leader. Was he always a good leader, or was it always a facade?
Yeah, very good questions. At the beginning of Red Dead 2, he's definitely someone that you can get behind. But once we get to know him a little bit better, yeah, you can definitely ask the question of how much of that is sincere and how much of it is just serving his own purposes to just maintain control of the Van Dullen gang. There is definitely a decline. And even from before Red Dead 2, we hear about some of the horrible things that he did at the Blackwater Massacre. So I think there was always an edge to Dutch that this man is capable of doing anything. He is very much, he presents himself as this kind of anarchic lord, who has an ideology that is better than the American government's, But at the end, he backs behind stuff that serves him and serves him only. And we see that more and more as the story progresses. But I think there's a lot of external circumstances that also lead to that as well. I think he starts to decline mental health-wise. He gets a little cuckoo. As Benjamin Byron Davis says, the cheese starts to slide off the cracker. That's a good way of putting it.
That is a good way, yeah. And it's not an instant like boom boom, it falls off. It's a slow sliding,
and then every once in a while it's 2 steps, he comes back to himself again, like getting Jack from the Braithwaite Manor. He doesn't think twice to get Jack,
I think Gorma is the tipping point for him. Yeah. It was the fulfillment of his dream, right? He wanted this kind of distant escape, but he doesn't get it on his terms. Obviously, they're shipwrecked, but yeah, that murder in the cave, that was, for me, that was when things turned. I'm like, this is a repugnant individual at this point. Yeah. That's when the cheese slid right off the cracker for me.
I think that's one of my favorite character moments when, like, you can tell there's really something is going to happen between Arthur and Dutch, and you keep killing people, Dutch.
Very good.
You're going to strangle me next?
And why doesn't he take the gold back off of her? I always ask that question. Why doesn't he take the gold back off of her?
I thought the game was all about realism.
He gave her like the gold bar. It was like the last of Dutch's money to guide us through this place. And then after he kills her, he doesn't loot. As I was playing, I was trying to loot her body. I was like, damn, she's still got some gold.
Well, they didn't nail every detail, it seems.
Well, there's so many,
Yeah, I mean,
but they got the horse testicles.
They got the horse testicles.
Yeah.
They didn't pronounce column right. That's always a bug. That always is a bug up my ass. But so be it.
Column, like column?
Yeah, it's column.
Really?
Yeah, it's column. Yeah.
Because that's a Irish name, or?
Yeah, it's pronounced column. I said, it's everybody's saying it wrong, right? and they just like, yeah, we don't care. Mind you, though, I saw they hired dialect experts to make sure all the Italian was right, all the Spanish spoken on Guarma, which was kind of a Haiti kind of Dominican Republic thing going on. And of course, all the native languages too. That was all pronounced correctly. But when it comes to Colin O'Driscoll, never mind.
Yeah, it's weird hearing him called Colin.
It sounds like they're saying colon.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like a part of the lower intestines.
Yeah, Colin.
So home. Sounds like Andy Serkis in Lord of the Rings. Home. Sounds like a cat trying to cough up a fur ball.
Yeah, yeah. But on that topic, what was it like for you? Because I think I had another viewer question that said you're born in New Jersey but raised in Ireland.
Yeah.
And now you're coming to America to voice like a Southern cowboy. That's
I really, really, really don't want to be rude, but could you please stop saying voice?
sorry.
Please.
No, you're not being rude, man. I was more so asking about the accent you had to put on to replicate like a Southern cowboy going from New Jersey to Ireland and then.
So I was working on, I was doing some theater, and one of the fellas from Arizona, his grandfather was from Flagstaff, Arizona, and he would do an impression of his grandfather, and I thought it was hilarious. And so I really started to practice and copy this guy. And then when it was time to do the audition, I threw in a bit more Southern in there, and because I figured geographical accuracy wasn't that important, because like you say, I traveled around a lot when I was a kid, and my accent's totally screwed up because of that now. It's to the point where I'm Irish in America, and I'm American in Ireland, and then any other part of the world that Australian sometimes. But so I thought, Arthur traveling around as a kid, he would pick up different bits and pieces on his voyages, and I didn't think that was a problem. Consistency was more important for me, especially over a 5-year period. I was grateful to be able to have such a great team behind me, and they helped me out a lot. But yeah, it's a bit of Arizona and a bit of Southern thrown in there. With little bits and bobs.
I will say, as the historian, that's totally spot on, because we have to recognize that in the late 1800s, most of the white people in the West are Easterners. Like they hadn't been there for very long, and if you were looking at cowboys especially, which I know Arthur's not really a cowboy in any traditional sense, most of the cowboys were Southerners. A lot of them were from Texas. Not all of them were white, to be sure. There were many black and Mexican-American cowboys too. But a lot of them are Southerners, so they would have had Southern accents. So I always thought of Arthur as a Southerner. He doesn't talk about that when he's in the South, right? In the same way that like Lenny, Lenny's a Southerner. He comes from the South, and he talks about his returning home and being very ambivalent about it. But I don't recall Arthur ever being from a place, which is fine.
He doesn't identify with any one region, but Dutch definitely, he refers to himself as a carpetbagger. He's definitely a Northern Yankee. You can hear his father, it's referenced that his father got killed
he dies in the Civil War.
Yeah, Roger, because the first time I heard you speak in your normal voice, I was like, whoa. It was jarring. By the way, I really did not mean to offend you. I don't want to
it's not
start you on a low honor playthrough and take me out.
It's not offensive. It's not offensive at all. It's just something I'm very passionate about, because it used to be all voice acting, right? 15, 20 years ago, that is the way that most games were done. But now the opposite is more true. So I'm very passionate about raising awareness, because if everybody thinks that what I did in Red Dead was in a booth just reading off of a script, then as a professional actor, that's the future opportunities that I'm going to be given. And as a professional actor, I just am keen to keep my pigeonhole as big as possible. So, it's like I was saying earlier, if you're kind enough to come to me and say how much the work meant to you, then the least I can do is make sure that you understand what the work actually was.
Right, because voice acting doesn't even encompass all of the effort and work you put in. So for you to hear
totally
that
different.
Would be like,
it's just completely different to what we did. It's not better, it's not worse. It's just completely different to what we did. It wasn't what we did.
It's what gives the tremendous humanity to that game, and many other games like it. And we were talking about AI previously. If this is a tremendous threat to the industry, it's even more so, if it was nothing but voice acting, right? If you're nothing but a voice, then we can replace that quickly. But given that it is a full capture of the human experience, which is what make those characters come alive on the screen so vividly, that the difference matters a lot.
I started out in theater, and I love being able to bounce off of my colleagues in a scene. And in voice acting, you more often than not, you don't get that luxury. Usually you're in a booth just like this, and you're not reading with your cast members. Maybe if you're lucky enough, their session was before yours, and the director has chosen the lines that they want to keep. So maybe you're hearing what they're saying and reacting to it. But for me, personally speaking, it's not the same as being out there on the in the volume, performing the scene as you would like with film and theater and television. Like I said, it's just you're wearing spandex and you look ridiculous, and there's pipes and scaffolding.
Tend to be a cowboy.
Yeah. But had it been voice acting, I think my job would have been a lot harder, because it does tend to be a more solitary art, and my hat goes off. I love voice acting. I don't consider myself to be like as good a voice actor as I am in other mediums, but I love it. I think it's fascinating. But I don't think Arthur would have been the same immersive character had I just been in a booth for 5 years. It wouldn't have been 5 years either. We probably would have gotten it done in half the time too.
Oh, absolutely. And that allowed you to imprint your own movements and things that other actors.
Arthur walks like I walk, even the little idiosyncratisms and all that stuff. I'm very grateful to have been given the luxury to have ownership of that. Everything you see Arthur do is me, except for major stuff. And some of the side missions, myself and Rob Wiedoff would do one, and then I would be ADR it in the booth afterwards, and vice versa. So sometimes, because of the side missions, it could be completed up by either or Arthur John. So sometimes he would do it, sometimes I would do it, and I can always tell, because Rob walks different to me. I can always tell.
Yeah, so I had a viewer question that kind of ties into this. It's from Christopher Cox Film. What was your secret to understanding Arthur? The key trait or motivation about him that the story doesn't show to the audience. What was that process like?
Time helped. I'd never spent so long with a character before. So I would say after the first couple of months, it became a lot easier to slip into Arthur. But at the beginning, I am a huge fan of Westerns. Some of my major influences were, there's this Japanese actor who was in a lot of Kurosawa movies, some of which were the influence and the origin for some Westerns. This guy called Toshiro Mifune. You might know him from films like Yojimbo and Seven Samurai and all that, which in turn were Fistful of Dollars and The Magnificent Seven. And he was awesome. And I just really rated him as a performer. So he was a huge influence, because he could be funny one minute and really dangerous the next, and he had this dry sense of humor that I wanted Arthur to have. Another big influence was Rob Wiedoff, because if nothing else, I knew I couldn't out John Marston, so trying to would be an exercise in futility. I knew that Arthur had to be his own guy, and let's face it, they're two white outlaws, so they already have a lot in common. So coming up with ways in which to make Arthur unique was helpful too at the beginning. I love Clint Eastwood, but I think there's a lot more of John Wayne and Arthur, because the dry wit. I think John Wayne was also an influence too.
What were some of your favorite scenes and or fellow actors to work with? Which scenes were the most fun for you to film?
Oh man, I loved the whole gang. We became a gang because we worked on it for so long.
In real life?
Yeah.
Sure, yes.
So
art reflects reality, huh?
All the stuff with Benjamin Byron Davis was a joy. He plays his Dutch. The woman who plays Sister Calderon, her name is Irene DeBari. She's a Los Angeles actor. She's also in Undead Nightmare. Some people might not know, but she's a badass in Undead Nightmare. She blows away some zombies pretty good. Working with her was a real joy. Graham Greene, who is Rain Falls, he's a legend, and you would recognize him in a lot of other stuff too. He was a real joy to work with. There really was everyone that came into that volume. It was always the same thing, because most people had never done performance capture before, and The first hour of the day was them wetting their feet to that and learning the different nuances of it and whatnot. And they would get it wrong too. They would show up thinking it was voice acting, and then it's on the car ride over there where they realize they actually have to get off book. Man, it used to be fun to see those guys get
I have
nervous.
to put the spandex on?
What?
Oh, shit.
And they were more worried because they didn't think they had to learn their lines. Obviously, we wanted them to know their lines, so we would help them out. And but it was always fun to see so many actors wetting their teeth on this brand new medium, you know. And I just tried to make everybody as comfortable as I could, because the more comfortable they were, then I knew the better scene we were going to get.
I can't think of a single, like, weak link in any of the scenes, dialogue, conversations. Typically in a video game, you'll hear some NPC or something, and you're like, that was pretty shitty delivery right there. But I can't think of a single one in Red Dead 1 or 2.
Yeah, I was curious, Roger, your intensive work with Arthur was now, 6, 7 years ago, or I was a while ago.
11
Yeah.
started at 11 years ago.
I know, it's crazy.
Wow.
What did it feel like this spring returning to the Western cowboy in doing the audiobook for Red Dead's history? And it's weird too, because you're talking about Red Dead Redemption. Like those are 3 words that never come out of Arthur Morgan's mouth, but they come out of your narration for the book. What was it like kind of returning in this kind of meta way to do the audiobook?
It was a joy. It was a real joy, especially because I know everybody hears the audiobook and they go, oh my gosh, that's Arthur. But in many ways, I was not thinking that I was narrating it as Arthur. I was just this pseudo kind of Arthur that's taking you on this journey that you wrote, Tori, and that's the way I was kind of viewing it, is Arthur is kind of your tour guide for all the historical context, which Dr. Olson very expertly put together. So I kind of didn't see it as a return to Arthur, but in many ways, he's a part of me now, and I don't think he's ever going to leave. And that I'm totally happy with that. It was the contract of a lifetime, and I'm just so grateful to even have had the chance to be part of something that's enjoyed by so many people. But to be able to, the fact that amazing professionals and academics such as yourself are still analyzing and studying this game, and that I'm invited to be a part of that is just really awesome.
It's the Oregon Trail of this generation.
Exactly. Yes.
It really is. And a much better message.
Yeah, no more dysentery. It's TB now, yeah.
Yeah. Lumbago and TB.
Lumbago's a very serious condition. Yeah.
Yeah, don't make fun. But no, you guys are kind of a killer combo, because you've got the history professor and the actor from the game combining your talents to have Arthur basically give a history lesson. And that's how you sell people on history.
History is super fascinating, right? Like, there's such a nasty stereotype that it's just this dead collection of names, dates, presidents, and wars. But it's this epic drama that it was totally unscripted. We didn't know what direction things were going to happen in. It's tremendously violent. American history is bloody, especially in that late 19th century moment. And if the game is going to, get people passionate about it, I say that's awesome, right? Like, historians should do more to engage people's passion and enthusiasm for, a fictional work of pop culture like Red Dead 2 and, any Red Dead game.
Yeah, one of the reasons why your message stood out so much is because, like, a book on a video game and the real history behind it, you don't typically see many books like that. There's not many games that you could write books like that about.
No, absolutely not. I remember when Klingon was being taught in college, I thought that was insanely cool. The fact that you could take a course in college and learn Klingon, and I think you can do it with some of the Elvish in Lord of the Rings too. I thought that was amazing, but this is even better.
One of the really cool things about it is that for each chapter that you wrote, you have an element of the Wild West, American frontier, and you also have its equivalent in the game. You talk about the Indian Wars, which I thought was really fascinating, about like what their role during that time was, and then you relate that to Charles, Eagle Flies, and the Wapiti tribe. And you do that for everything, like a railroad tycoons and those corporate businessmen in Leviticus, Cornwall. And also like there's all those quests where you track down the different gunslingers, and then it makes you curious, like, well, who were the real gunslingers? And so I really loved the structure of the book. It's turning into a book club right now.
Oh.
But the way it's structured is you can kind of just jump between chapter and chapter and read about whatever aspect of history is most interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes it was really obvious what the real historical inspiration was. Like New Orleans, Saint Denis, totally, there's no sort of confusion about that. I always thought that, the Wapiti were modeled after the Lakota Sioux of the Dakota territories. But then there's more confusing things like West Elizabeth. What exactly is that? Well, there's no neat equivalent to it. My book is not, as you know, right, it's not a sort of encyclopedia of the real world equivalents. It's more about like, what are the big dilemmas of this period? Why are people shooting each other? Why, was Wild Bill Hickok gunning people down in the streets of Abilene, Kansas? And try to fill in the answer. And a lot of it, is different from those Hollywood epics that we've seen. A lot of it's about politics. A lot of it's about capitalism. And I like it because Red Dead 2 does gesture toward that, right? I mean, they do make big social dilemmas part of the story. They're not as central as it actually was, but they try, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it fleshes out all of the gang members, right? It's also pretty funny, the idea of Arthur going to a women's suffrage rally,
Yeah, they ate me alive.
Yeah.
How many AAA video games feature not just the question of women's suffrage, but women's suffrage in the Deep South in the 1890s? Like, that's so cool that they went there.
Yeah.
Can't think of any, to be honest. So yeah, I think I have maybe one last question. I wanted to ask you guys, do you think it's possible to make a Red Dead 3?
I'd be very surprised if they don't. It's so successful. I have no inside knowledge about it, and even if I did, I would tell you that I don't.
Right.
But I would be very surprised if we don't see another Red Dead Redemption, or maybe in a slightly different format. Remember, Revolver, the granddaddy of them all, is pretty much, as far as the narrative is concerned, is completely separate from Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2. So maybe it's not the same characters, but the same world, and maybe some of the characters that we've grown to love in these two games, make short cameos in the next one. But I think they're busy with a little game called GTA 6 at the moment. But I'd be very surprised if we've seen the last of Red Dead Redemption. But whether or not Arthur or the Van der Linde gang is involved in that, your guess is as good as mine. I could think just as easily they don't, because it's such a wonderful world, and one thing that Rockstar are excellent at is introducing new characters, and making us all fall in love with them. So yeah, I definitely see it. It's just, it was too successful not to pursue, but I think it might be a while.
So in my book, my epilogue is like my view of what Red Dead 3 should be. And it's basically set between Red Dead Revolver, which is an 1860s game, and Red Dead 2. So I'm thinking 1870s. Because 1870s is such a turbulent decade in the US. It's much more wild than anything going on in 1899, to be sure. So if they want to showcase a lot of violence and unrest, well, the early 1870s would certainly be that moment. And I'd love for us to catch Arthur as a young man, Hosea as a young man, maybe Dutch, playable Dutch. That would be pretty cool.
Landon Ricketts.
Oh, Landon Ricketts, there you go.
Yeah, Landon Ricketts. He'd be in his prime then.
He's definitely one of my favorites from the first game, like mentor to John.
He was such a cool character, and I think that actor has since passed away, but that guy, yeah. I didn't work with him, but I remember Rob telling stories about it. Now, that actor was in, I believe, one of the original Planet of the Apes movies.
No shot, really?
Yeah. The one, that makeup still holds up, doesn't it? And I remember our director at the time, Rod Edge, he was asking him about it. He says, "What was it like?" And he says, in his typical Landon Ricketts voice, he says, "It was just like this. We put ridiculous stuff on and try to act,
Yeah, just like that. So then, what does the future hold for both of you guys? Any interesting projects you're working on? Where do you go from here? Red Dead has kind of been covered, and you wrote the book on its history. Where do we go from here, fellas?
Sure, yeah. I've got some games coming out. Some of them I can't talk about, but I do have Rosewater coming out next year, and there's another one called Evolutus Duality coming out next year. I've got a horror feature coming out in January, which was a lot of fun. We filmed that up in New England. And there's still a lot of audiobooks, thankfully, to be done. So yeah, I can't believe I'm still working. You know, I pinch myself so often that I'm black and blue up and down my arms. But I'm just grateful for the chance to still be working and to still have work that challenges me. And the fact that I'm here now, still talking about a job that I finished 6 years ago, is an honor. It's an absolute honor. You know, that's all any artist really wants, is for their work to be enjoyed, and I have that. So I am a blessed man.
And we are blessed to have you. Let me just say that we are blessed to have you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and working with you, Roger, on this project was just a dream come true. You know, it was unbelievable.
I really enjoyed it, Tori. It's an excellent book. I learned a lot reading it, and it's so well done. And I know that there's a lot more in there, and I know that we're going to see a lot more work from you to come. And your students over there at University of Tennessee are very lucky.
Well, thanks.
It was super fun. I've actually started teaching a bit at Quinnipiac. I was doing mocaps, teaching mocap for like developers and gamers and game developers. And Tori was very helpful to me. He was giving me a few pointers on doing my first lectures and stuff, because I was a little nervous, I'm not going to lie. Yeah. But Tori
we're both professors now, right?
You've got a few more initials after your name, but yes, thank you. It's an honor to be held in the same. Yeah.
Yeah, we were professors like you when I was in school, man.
I went to drama school. I had some cool teachers. I had to drama school, so there were some cool teachers. Yeah,
Yeah. I bet drama school has the best teachers.
They are pretty cool, most of them. Some of them are actually pretty strict, though. Like, telling you diction and making sure you speak properly. But some of them are really cool as well.
Yeah, history is just one of those topics where, like, depending on the professor, it'll make or break the class, right? It's just endless lecture. But Tori seems like he's got a lot more energy, pep in his step, kind of.
Yeah, and I had so much fun doing this project, and it convinced me that video games are such a powerful way to get wide audiences to care and ask big questions about history. So I am going to do it again for a different game franchise. I'm starting with another experimental class.
Awesome.
Teaching it in the spring of 26. Working hard on it right now. And I'm going to go more closer to the current moment. I'm going to delve into America since about 1980, because I think something really changes in America with the election of Reagan and the kind of embrace of this hyper-capitalist, free market capitalism that really kind of comes into high gear in the 80s and 90s and into the present day.
That's awesome.
So I'm really going to narrate the last 50 years of American history. I'm not going to say exactly what franchise I'm using, but I will mention that it's been developed by the same people who made
Oh, come on. That's obvious. That's obvious now, Tori. I can't wait to see your take on San Andreas, though. That would be epic, man. That'd be epic.
Oh, yeah.
I'm playing, I'm taking notes, I'm reading a ton of books.
You're watching,
Stay tuned.
Miami Vice? Oh, I can't wait. That's awesome, Tori.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited about it too.
Soon you'll have your own shelf of video game history and lore,
Cool, man.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you guys today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. Did my best to conduct this interview as best I could,
You were awesome, man. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I love the Dutch outfit. It's fantastic.
Thank you. It's even though I'm like a YouTube personality and people have like that fanboy reaction, it's like I still get that with people that I really respect and admire their work.
Yeah, thanks, Ackman. This has been super fun. You're such a great host. Brilliant questions, thoughtful reading of the game, of the book, and it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much. And if you want to check out the book, link will be in the description, pinned comment, all that jazz. And as will their socials, so feel free to follow them, check the book out, highly recommend it. And yeah, we'll look forward to what you have to say on Grand Theft Auto. There's a lot to dive in there.
Oh, so much.
So thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this incredible interview with Roger Clark and Tori Olson. Like I said, you can find links to Red Dead's history in the description and in the pinned comment. By the way, I was not paid anything for this. I just thought the book was really cool. It was an opportunity to talk with Roger. And I think if you're into Red Dead Redemption, you should consider checking out the book as well. We did have limited time, so I didn't get to ask him all the questions I wanted, but I got a few viewers in there. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the interview. Leave a like if you did, and subscribe to The Act Man for more awesome content. All right, everyone, that's all I got for today. This is The Act Man signing out. Peace.
After the release of Red Dead Redemption 2, I still find myself thinking about it. This game has moved me, affected me in ways that no other piece of entertainment media ever has. I've never been able to find the right words to properly explain this incredible experience I had back in 2018, only that I know that its quality transcends gaming as a medium and is fair to be compared to any of entertainment's great stories. So many things I have to say about this game, its characters and its message, all swirling around in my mind. But if I were to try and explain every detail of what I think makes this game amazing, this video would be very, very long. So instead, I want to break down one aspect of it that I think is its strongest, and that is the characterization and arc of its main protagonist. Obviously, I can't talk about this without completely spoiling the story, so consider this your spoiler warning. With that out of the way, I'd like to begin telling you about the greatest fictional character I've ever seen, Arthur Morgan. I think good first impressions can be key when constructing compelling and empathetic characters, especially in cases like Arthur, where we're expected to spend 90 or so hours with him. And it really didn't take long for Arthur to shine. He is a stone-cold badass, the brawn to Dutch's brains. But that was a fact made clear in the trailers. It wasn't until the game actually came out that we got to see the main components of what made him so likable. Straight out of the gate, it's clear he's characterized with a very rich and deep personality, even more so than some actual real living people I've met. He's as impassive and rough around the edges as you'd expect from a man from the 1890s, but he has a sincerity and selflessness to his personality that allows him to remain good-natured and approachable. Despite outward appearances, deep down, he is just a big softie.
Pleased to meet you.
Well, you just the toughest teak mountain man.
Oh, you be quiet, Anastasia. Anyone can tell this one is a pussy cat.
Exactly. Yes, he's a pussy cat. And that's so worth her.
Whatever you say. How much you cost, anyway?
Ain't that a nice way to talk to a lady?
Oh, I didn't know I was talking to a lady.
Excuse me.
That reminds me, he also possesses a hilariously sharp wit. He is very funny. Anyway, creating a character that is stoic and intimidating with violent impulsions, and then using him as a vessel to explore themes of love, family, and responsibility is a fascinating decision for the writers to make, and not to mention a difficult task for the actor to pull off. After experiencing Arthur Morgan's story and coming to the conclusion that I'd never seen a character quite like him, it forced me to ask the question, what makes a truly great and compelling character? Aside from an award-winning performance like the one delivered by Roger Clark, I'd argue that good characters have depth, a vibrant personality, are believable, relatable, and perhaps most importantly, undergo some kind of evolution or change throughout the story. That change could be for better or for worse.
But I'm not a good man, Jimmy Brooks. Not usually. You see, I was in Blackwater. I killed people. And maybe I should have killed you. Should I have killed you, Jimmy Brooks?
Me? I never saw you. No, not now, not never. I think we have an understanding.
Of course we do. Jimmy Brooks. I will remember that. I've got a good memory.
This is Arthur in the beginning of the story. While kind-hearted as a friend, Arthur is downright terrifying as an adversary, a blunt instrument designed to enact the will of the Vandalin gang, Dutch's most trusted associate and go-to guy for any manner of intimidation and brute-like strength. This is how Arthur sees himself, a bad man who does bad things. Being one of the first people that Dutch Vandalin recruited into the gang 20 years before the beginning of the game, we're left to assume that Arthur has seen himself this way for most, if not all, of that time. This is why he doesn't ever bat an eyelid at doing dishonorable deeds. The most obvious example of this being his treatment of Thomas Downs when Arthur is sent to collect on a loan that Downs made from the gang.
You borrowed money from my business partner, Herr Strauss. You owe him, he took the money. He wants it back, what's not to understand? Where's our money?
I don't have it.
Same place.
We already owe more than it's worth.
Then sell your wife, or your family, or something. We ain't your idea of charity. Is that clear?
Thomas!
What are you looking at?
Thomas!
I said what you looking at, woman.
My husband isn't well. If we could just have more.
Like I said, we ain't nobody's idea of charity. Get us the money.
Mr. Downs later dies of his injuries, and Arthur still returns a few weeks later to collect on the loan from the now widowed Mrs. Downs, even throwing in a seemingly needless threat against her son.
My husband's not cold on the ground and you come back here. Archie, I nearly paid off what was owed.
Your husband knew the rules when he took that money. Now, I'm real sorry about the way things turned out, but he had a choice. Ain't my fault about the way the world is.
He didn't have a choice. He was good and he did good. There wasn't no choice in that. And you as good as killed him yourself, and don't kid yourself. You had a choice.
You speak as if killing was something I cared about.
You ever wonder about eternity? You should.
I hope it's hot and terrible, Mrs. Downs. Otherwise, I'll feel I've been sold a false bill of goods. Now, please, give me that money. Either you got a lazy eye or lack of respect. Which is it, boy?
I ain't got no lazy eye. No respect for the likes of you.
Well, maybe when your mother's finished mourning your father, I'll keep her in black on your behalf. You think on that, boy?
He knows his actions ultimately make him a quote-unquote bad man, but he still feels as though whatever he does is justified by his responsibility to provide for the camp. It's a role he feels is necessary for him to play, as there are 23 other gang members, some of them women and children, who are relying on him to do this in order to provide, much like any parent would do for their family. And to Arthur, that's what this gang is, his family. But it is an age-old question of morality. What lengths would you go to provide for the people that you care about? And I think most people's answer to that question is often further than what the law would allow. And Arthur is a complete representation of that fact. A representation that the ends always justify the means. So for that reason, we never find him objectively unlikable despite him conducting himself this way. Also, having a character like Micah Bell in the story is a helpful juxtaposition to Arthur, because while both are career criminals and ride in the same gang, Micah, in his bones, is a disgusting, perverted, evil man who has no problem brutally killing or tormenting anyone at any time for any reason. Hell, he even enjoys it. But having him in the gang helps highlight how Arthur is not like that at all, doing what he does out of a perceived necessity and takes no pleasure in needless violence.
And thank you. There I was, having a dull day only for you, to liven it up by letting me help you shoot up half a town.
And even in the case of his seemingly needless threat against Archie Downs' life, I can actually kind of see how Arthur rationalized that it would be necessary for him to do that, because this is the rest of their interaction.
I'll keep her in black, on your behalf. You think on that, boy?
Well, maybe you shall, sir. And maybe other events will transpire.
You best stick to them books, because mark my words on this. Vengeance is an idiot's game. Ah, Mrs. Downs, thank you for your punctuality.
He's trying to intimidate Archie into standing down, advising him to think of his mother before throwing himself in front of the crosshairs of a man like Arthur. It's a rough way of warning him, sure, but I do believe he's only trying to reduce the risk of needless violence. It's examples like these that make it so that Arthur can say and do evil things without necessarily being an evil character, otherwise known as an anti-hero. I can't really discuss the evolution of Arthur's character throughout the story without discussing the role of his mentor in that evolution. Arthur's relationship to Dutch van der Linde is an interesting one. Dutch is an enigmatic personality to say the least, and absolutely deserving of his own in-depth character analysis. But to Arthur, there isn't anything mysterious about the way that he looks up to Dutch as a mentor and as a father figure. The values of absolute, unwavering loyalty, trust, and responsibility to the gang are ones that Dutch preaches on a very regular basis, and thus these values have become ideals instilled in Arthur so strongly that he'd happily die in the name of them. In retrospect, Arthur's adoption of these beliefs seems less like the result of a father imparting wisdom unto his son, and more like the preachings of a cult leader indoctrinating his most loyal follower. And so as the story unfolds and the looming threat of the law closing on the game becomes more and more prevalent, the facade of Dutch's warm-hearted, idealistic persona begins to unravel, and we start to see Dutch's true colors.
Already, the dogs are on the way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're right. You are so right. They are good at smelling filth, hon. So filth has got to be disposed of. Your friends are making it. Gonna come and rescue you. You repulsive little maggot. Call them now. You call them.
Jesus.
What in your philosophy books cover feeding the fella? The goddamn alligator, Dutch. Part that covers weakness. That part.
It's difficult to say at what point Dutch truly becomes the villain of the story, or at what point Arthur's faith in Dutch's ability to lead diminishes, but I am certain that Arthur never stopped loving and caring for Dutch as the man who basically raised him. Even as Dutch's descent into villainy becomes increasingly obvious, Arthur never turns his back on him no matter how much we want him to. Arthur's indoctrination simply runs too deep, and no matter how despicable Dutch becomes, he simply cannot betray the man who spent the last 20 years being his father. The other wrinkle in all this for Arthur is about justifying his actions as a career criminal. Arthur's entire code of ethics is based on Dutch's preachings, and every crime he's ever committed was done so under the guise of just trying to survive. If all the justifications for Arthur's life of crime were based on the ideals of a man who was, in actuality, just a heartless monster, then Arthur's crimes aren't really justified at all, slowly realizing that the ends don't actually justify the means. If Dutch turns out not to be the man that Arthur believed him to be, then Arthur's entire identity gets called into question, raising some seriously existential dilemmas within Arthur. With all that in mind, it's easy to understand why Arthur has such a hard time turning his back on Dutch as easily as we would, and why being introspective about all this is an exceptionally challenging task for Arthur to confront.
Okay, now here. Breathe. Again. Let me see your tongue. Say ah. Ah.
What is it?
It's not good news.
I guess that.
You got tuberculosis. Really sorry for you, son. It's a hell of a thing.
And just like that, fate forces his hand. Arthur is now faced with the fact that he is, in all likelihood, going to die, and that absolutely rocks him to his core. He's never seemed to be scared of death up to this point in his life, but the concept of dying is now a hell of a lot scarier now he actually has time to contemplate it. This causes his perspective to radically shift, as if to open his eyes for the very first time, completely reevaluating what's important to him, and seemingly for the first time in his life, he really struggles with the morality of his actions, both past and present. He recognizes that the clock is now ticking, with every cough reminding him of his looming mortality. And since he sees himself as a hopeless cause, he chooses to dedicate the time he has left to others. He is still with the gang, sure, but he starts acting more charitably, more compassionately. He starts giving his time and money to people in need, absolving debts instead of collecting them, donating to the church in Saint Denis, and refusing cash rewards for helping people. Even going as far as helping the Downs family get back on their feet, protecting Archie Downs from bullies at the Annisburg mine, and giving money to him and his mum to help start over somewhere else.
Here, take this. I don't need it no more.
I don't want your money.
Yeah, I know you don't want it.
I don't.
You sure as shit need it. Take it.
No.
I ain't looking for forgiveness. It ain't about that. But don't forgive me. Just take the money and get out of here, please. I know I ruined your life. I suffer for it every day. But don't let yourself get killed for pride. I've seen it kill too many folk. Don't say anything. Don't thank me. Just take the money and pack your bags. That's All I gotta say.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Morgan.
said don't thank me. Get out of here. Please.
I think it was important for us to see this because Arthur ruining the lives of the Downs family is one of the bad deeds in his life we actually saw him do. So one could argue that it was actually the audience's forgiveness he needed more than the Downses. As I mentioned, these are things he decides to do due to his circumstances and newfound clarity. But it's also made clear that despite all of his kind actions, he still feels that none of it makes up for a lifetime of wrongdoings, and at least some part of his motivation for doing good deeds is to atone in some way for doing so many bad ones. But it is a good question. If you had 6 months left to live, how could you possibly redeem yourself of 20 years of murder, assault, robbery, extortion, and exploitation? Arthur seems to come to the conclusion that you just can't. And to be completely honest, I actually found myself kind of agreeing with that. 6 months is just not enough time, and even if he had more, would it even matter? Is it even possible to redeem that many sins? And so he's changing his ways and he's turning over this new leaf, but he doesn't believe in it. He doesn't believe that it'll change anything. He believes that he is a bad man, and no matter how many nice things he does from here on out, he will still die a bad man, and flatly disagrees with anybody who says otherwise.
Brother Dorcas was right about you. You are the most wonderful man.
Brother Dawkins is greatly deceived, I'm afraid, but I'm happy to help a little.
What I think is brilliant is that we don't learn any of his thoughts through some lengthy expository voiceover because big, eloquent, grandiose speeches isn't really one of Arthur's strengths. It's just not who he is. We know Arthur so well at this point that we just kind of know that this is all going on in his head through little clues in conversations, his body language, his mannerisms, his newfound generosity, and some entries in his journal. We can gradually piece together that Arthur, deep down, is an extremely confused and troubled man at this point in his life. However, being a prototypical masculine personality, he always presents himself to everyone else like he's fine and that there's nothing going on with him. Cracking a joke and dismissing someone's concerns about him just to move the conversation along is his absolute go-to move.
And how are you?
Never better.
You okay?
Peach? I reckon you're gonna be just fine.
Are you alright? Can I get you some water?
I'm fine.
This is not healthy, and it makes him just as sick mentally as he is physically, in my opinion. Whenever we talk about men's mental health or how some men have an innate inability to express their feelings, this is the example I think of. I often found myself yelling at the screen, begging him to talk to someone, anyone, about what he's going through.
Morgan, are you okay?
Well, never better. What are you doing here?
Well, I'm on my way down to Mexico. They're finally sending me on a mission. Brother Dorkins is very jealous. What's wrong?
I'm dying, sister.
Okay.
Yeah, I got TB. I got it. Beating a man to death for a few bucks. I've lived a bad life, sister.
We've all lived bad lives, Mr. Morgan. We all sin. But I know you.
You don't know me.
Forgive me, but that's the problem. You don't know you.
What do you mean?
I don't know, but whenever we happen to meet, you're always helping people and smiling.
I had a son. He passed away. I had a girl who loved me. I threw that away. My mama died when I was a kid. And my daddy, well, I watched him die. And it weren't soon enough.
My husband died a long time ago. Life is full of pain. But there is also love and beauty.
What am I gonna do now?
Be grateful that for the first time, you see your life clearly.
Sure.
Perhaps you could help somebody. helping makes you really happy.
But I still don't believe in nothing.
Often, neither do I.
Huh?
But then I meet someone like you, and everything makes sense.
You're too smart for me, sister. I guess I'm afraid.
There is nothing to be afraid of, Mr. Morgan. Take a gamble that love exists and do a loving act.
All aboard! I shall try.
I know you will.
I love this scene. It's so satisfying for Arthur to finally just man up and admit it, just to let it out. And Sister Calderon's heartwarming response is exactly what Arthur needed to hear. Arthur this whole time has been reflecting on his life of 20 years of bad deeds and wondering how many good ones he needs to perform to make up for it all. And as I mentioned earlier, with only 6 months left to live, that is an impossible task. However, I believe that Sister Calderon's point is that good and bad deeds throughout a person's life don't get tallied up at the end to determine if a person was good or bad. Arthur's opportunity to become a good man only started when he first saw his life clearly. That being a good or bad person is not an adjective you get to use to describe yourself, but instead it's something that is earned through how you affect the lives of the people around you. And in Sister Calderon's time around Arthur, all she's seen him do is help people and smile. So from her perspective, of course, Arthur is unquestionably
The most wonderful man.
And finally, she finishes the conversation telling Arthur to take a gamble that love exists and do a loving act. I'll get back to that quote a little later, but I'd like to point out that this conversation does contain a really sweet message, and that is that it's never too late to start doing the right thing, no matter how far gone you think you are. And it's a lesson I think is applicable to all aspects of everyday life. It's never too late to start working harder, to love more, be healthier, make a change, be kinder, etc. Anyway, from this point on, Arthur has a renewed sense of conviction and purpose. Him doing good deeds is no longer just about achieving his redemption, but it's about doing the right thing because it's right. One of my favourite moments demonstrating the growth of his character is in his last debt collection mission, in which he is once again tasked with confronting a widow whose husband borrowed money from the gang. However, this time, Arthur, with his newfound clarity, takes a different approach.
We lent Arthur some money, you see, and
So was you. Son of a bitch. What do you want now? You want my boy's shoes? You want the food out of our bellies? What little there is? Want me to lie down for you?
no.
Arthur gave everything to pay your bills. Everything. And now there's some fellas coming to take the house. There ain't nothing left, mister.
I just wanted to say the debt's canceled and to here, take this. You won't bring your husband back, I know. You need money and I don't.
Well, you're a good man. I just wish you'd done it before he worked himself into the grave.
I'm sorry, man. I really am.
As for that loving act that Arthur promises Sister Calderon that he'd try and perform, it comes quite poetically in the form of John Marston. Arthur recognizes that the gang as we know it is about to collapse, and that Dutch at this point has become so volatile that if anyone attempted to run away and escape the outlaw life, it would be interpreted as complete disloyalty and betrayal. In John, Arthur sees a younger version of himself, still with all the opportunities for an honest life with a family that has since passed Arthur by.
I feel like you should take your woman and child and get lost.
Do you?
You could give something to Jack. It's that or, well, I don't see no way out of this.
But what about loyalty?
The Lord, what matters?
What are you gonna do?
I'll be okay, but do it for me. It would make me feel good, if that makes any sense.
A little, but
Listen to me. When the time comes, you gotta run and don't look back. This is over.
Arthur makes it his mission to ensure that if the gang goes down, John and his family will not go down with it, believing that John's family is the one glimmer of positivity that can come out of all of this death and chaos.
One more big score. We got enough money to leave. All this turmoil has the army and Pinkerton spinning. We take a boat and slip away.
I don't know what you're saying, Dutch, but it seems like I've heard it all before.
Just one more.
There's always a goddamn train.
Arthur, this is different. We know this is full of cash. Army payroll, money and supplies to repair the bridge that you blew. This is all going to plan. What do you think?
It sounds wonderful. Hell, yeah. I ain't got much to lose, but you know, the women and the children. And John and his family, I'm afraid I have to insist. I mean, we gotta let them go, because if the Pinkertons come through again, they will kill everyone.
John? Insist?
Yeah. Insist.
The final sequence in Arthur's story is a roller coaster to say the least, and I'm not here to recap the story or sit here and just watch cutscenes with you, because I could easily stretch this video to 90 minutes dissecting each one. All I'll say is that every single scene in the last two missions is masterfully directed and performed, and completely serves to send off Arthur's character in the most beautifully heartbreaking way possible. His final scene with Sadie and Abigail and the subsequent final ride back to camp is featured in countless crying compilations of other people on YouTube because it is undeniably very moving. It forces you to reflect on Arthur's journey of redemption and how far he's come as a character. I myself am pretty good at holding it together in emotional scenes, but even the most stone-cold gamers are going to have a hard time with this one, and it only gets harder as the ending unfolds. Arthur returns to camp to warn Dutch, having uncovered the truth that Micah has been snitching to the law about the gang's movements. It is fascinating to me that even after Dutch has made decisions that's directly resulted in the deaths of other members of the gang, abandoned Abigail and John at various stages in the story multiple times when they needed rescuing, and literally left Arthur to die, Arthur still, despite all that, does not turn his back on Dutch and still feels the need to look out for the man he once called his father. That is fucking loyalty. And it makes this moment,
I gave you all I had.
utterly devastating.
Right, Arthur, come on, let's go.
You go.
Keep pushing, Arthur.
No. No. I think I've pushed all I can.
Come on.
You go.
We ain't got time for this, not now.
We ain't both gonna make it. Go. Now. I'll hold them up. It would mean a lot to me. Please. There ain't no more time for talk. Go.
Arthur.
Go to your family.
Arthur!
Get the hell out of here and be a goddamn man.
You're my brother.
I know. I know.
I mentioned before that Arthur doesn't do long, impassioned speeches, nor is he terrific at conveying his feelings. But here he doesn't need to. All of that sincerity and emotion comes through in the performance. Arthur saying goodbye in the most Arthur way possible should put a smile on every face who watches it. And at the very end, when he's beaten and bloody, just minutes away from death, he says,
I tried. In the end, I did.
"You sure did, mate." It's a line that always makes me crack a teary smile. It made me realize that he lies there not as a casualty of Dutch's evil machinations, but as the winner of his own story. He took a gamble that love exists, and he did a loving act. He earned the redemption that he never thought he'd have, and was able to die on his own terms, watching the sunrise one last time. Before I actually sat down to write all this out, I thought I had so much ready to say that it would be easy for me to write. But when I actually sat down to start, I couldn't write anything. It must have been 3 days that I stared at a blank Word document with no words coming to mind, only feelings I didn't quite know how to articulate. Because that's what this character did to me, what he still does to me 4 years later, and that is leave me speechless. And because of that effect that this character had on me, Arthur Morgan is, for my money, the greatest fictional character I have ever seen.
Was that everything you hoped for?
Jury's still out. Man, can't deny that view.
The game company Naughty Dog has been known to make some of the most influential games of their time, such as the original Crash Bandicoot games, Jak and Daxter, and the Uncharted series. While those are great games that gave the company a great reputation, none of those games changed the industry as much as The Last of Us. The Last of Us is critically acclaimed with the title of one of the greatest games of all time, and over the years it climbed its way up to being the third best-selling game on the PS3 with 7 million sales, with the remastered version being the 8th bestseller on the PS4 with 10 million sales. The game is considered a masterpiece by many, including me, which is why I wanted to talk about why I love the game so much. Like always, quick disclaimer here. This is only my third video documentary, so there may be some mistakes. Also, there will be plenty of spoilers in this video, so play the game before watching this video to get the ideal experience. I also want to mention that I'll mainly be talking about the remastered version when I'm talking about the graphics, since I don't own a PS3 to play the original version. Now let's talk about how this masterpiece of a game came to be. After the incredibly successful release of Uncharted 2, Naughty Dog split into two teams for the first time. One team working on Uncharted 3, and the other team starting a new game project based on an idea from then game developer Neil Druckmann. Druckmann had an idea for a zombie game involving a police officer and his daughter, in which the characters had to work together, and the player character would switch to the daughter whenever the officer's heart problems acted up. It was an interesting concept, but it had some tweaking that needed to be done before they could take action on the idea. Naughty Dog decided against the idea of the two characters being related, as they felt it didn't allow for character development between the two, and the main character went from a police officer to a smuggler. The development of the game was kept on the down low for a long time, until they finally announced it at the Spike Video Game Awards, alongside a trailer for the game.
Hey,
There you are. You okay?
better than that guy.
Sit, chum.
I obviously can't show the whole trailer here, but it really is a great way to announce the game. It is pretty ambiguous. All it does is show off the partner dynamic between Joel and Ellie and some of the threats that they'll be dealing with, but it's done in a way that captures the audience's attention and makes them hungry for more information about the project. Thanks to Naughty Dog's reputation for making great games, people were incredibly excited for the game, and the gaming industry changed when The Last of Us released on June 14, 2013. The moment The Last of Us released, people fell in love with the game. It sold 1.3 million units in just a week, and the sales didn't stop quickly. It's no wonder why people liked the game so much. It had interesting gameplay, great characters, and one of the best stories found in gaming. To better see why the game was so incredible, let's dig into the specifics of the game, starting with the soundtrack. The soundtrack was composed by Gustave Santaolalla? Yeah, that's probably right. And the songs that he made for this game are incredible. He does a great job of making songs that sound a bit somber, but also a bit hopeful, and he brings out the intense music when he has to. Something that you'll notice in the soundtrack is that a lot of songs share the same title but just have different subtitles. For example, we have the main theme of the game rightfully titled The Last of Us, which has a guitar as the main instrument and has an intense beat, but we have The Last of Us Never Again, which is significantly slower and calmer and has an orchestral instrument being played instead. Having these variations of the main themes does a great job to familiarize the player with the music that plays. On my first playthrough, I was actually able to recognize the songs that played since I heard them earlier in the game, and for some reason it made the scenes feel more impactful hearing a similar theme throughout the game. The gameplay of The Last of Us is simple but effective. It follows a trend that a lot of games have where stealth is encouraged, but you can go in guns blazing if you'd like, though it'll be more difficult. The game is in third person, and the player has to follow a linear path that is disguised by areas that can be explored for loot. Typically, to traverse, the player is presented with an obstacle, and they're required to look around to find an object to help them progress. For example, if a tall truck is blocking the way, you may need to find a dumpster to push in front of it to help you climb on, or maybe there's a ladder nearby that you can prop onto the side of the vehicle. Scenarios like this make the game feel less linear than just walking forward and fighting enemies, since the player regularly has to go on detours to move the story along. The survival side of the game shines through with the crafting system. There are different types of materials that can be found in the environment, such as blades, tape, cloth, alcohol, explosives, and sugar. The player can use these to make different items to help them in combat. There are predetermined crafting recipes in your inventory, for example, 1 cloth and 1 alcohol for a medkit, and this linearity makes the crafting necessary but not difficult. For combat, the player has to fight zombies and humans quite often, and the first weapon you have are your fists. If there's just a couple of low-level zombies in your way, you should have no problem punching them to death, as long as you have adequate health. You can also sneak up behind zombies and people to choke them for a stealth kill. As you play through the game, you get introduced to new weapons, such as a revolver, a shotgun, and even a flamethrower. There are also different types of zombies you can encounter, such as clickers, which are blind zombies who have great hearing and they can kill you in one hit, so it's best to sneak around and try to kill them first. There's also some tricks you can use, such as grabbing enemies to use as human shields that can help you take out a large group of enemies. Finally, The Last of Us has the occasional quick-time event that can happen when you're grappled by a zombie, or in cinematic moments to complete tasks that aren't normally found in the gameplay. They aren't too invasive, so I don't mind them all that much. The Last of Us was released near the end of the PS3's lifetime, so it's no wonder the graphics hold up so well to this day. Developers had mastered that generation of consoles, so they used all the tools they could to make a great-looking game that ran at a solid 30 FPS, and the remastered version looks even better at 60 FPS. The game actually looks really good on the remastered version. Of course, when you look closely, you can see the muddy textures, especially in darker areas when they're lit up with a flashlight, but in a nice bright environment, this game looks like it could have come out 5 years later than it did. It has a pretty realistic look, but there's also a style to it that I can't quite pin down. I think it's almost a little bit cartoonish. Sure, it's dark and gritty, but then you get into these open areas that are so bright and shiny, it almost seems dreamlike. I don't know, maybe that doesn't make any sense, but that's just the feeling that I get from it. The environment around the player is usually really detailed, and the world feels real because of the movie posters and billboards that are littered around the map. At the end of the day, the game still looks great, and the 60 FPS the remastered version brings to the table increases the enjoyment a ton. Okay, so far we have a pretty good game with great graphics and solid gameplay, but add the incredible story that this game provides and you are in for a treat. Let's start right from the beginning with one of the most iconic game intros to date. We start out with a little girl named Sarah sleeping on a couch late at night, and her dad Joel bursting into the room, talking on the phone about a job that seems pretty stressful. Sarah wakes up and realizes that she still has time before the day ends to give her dad the birthday gift she got him, a new watch. They almost seem to talk like friends despite Joel being her father, and clearly they're very close.
Where did you get the money for this?
Drugs. I sell hardcore drugs.
Oh, good. We started helping out with the mortgage then.
Yeah, you wish.
You can tell by the phone call and the late time that Joel came home that his job keeps him busy and out of the house often, but he seems to work hard to provide for him and his daughter. Sarah quickly passes out after giving him his gift, and he brings her to bed calling her his nickname for her, Baby Girl. Later that night, Sarah is woken up by a phone call from her Uncle Tommy, who is frantically asking her to put Joel on the phone, but he gets cut off midway through the phone call.
Hello?
Sarah, I
Honey, I need to get your daddy on the phone.
Uncle Tommy, what time is it?
I need to talk to your dad now.
Uncle Tommy? Hello?
The player controls Sarah, and there are a lot of interactable items around the house that the player can look at while searching for Joel. Joel seems to be nowhere in sight, and the news report on the TV shows that bad things are happening in the city.
What was that? Oh, God.
Eventually, Sarah finds Joel, and he frantically grabs a gun and shoots their next-door neighbor, who isn't acting right and is trying to attack them. Uncle Tommy picks Joel and Sarah up so they can try to get out of the area, and we already get a sneak peek of Joel's eventual survival skills when they pass right by a family that needs help.
See what they need? What do you think you're doing? Keep driving. You got a kid, Joe. So do we.
We have room.
Keep driving, Tommy.
Unfortunately, the streets are all backed up, and while they're trying to find an alternate route through the city, they get hit by another car. Everybody's alive, but Sarah has a broken leg, so the player's controller switch to Joel. While getting out of the car, we get an extra close look at an infected person who grabs Joel, but luckily Uncle Tommy is able to save him by smashing it with a brick. Joel gives Tommy the gun so he can carry Sarah, and they try to escape the city together while evading infected people and the explosions that are lighting up the city. After some detours and encounters with the infected, they flee into a building where Tommy holds the door shut to let Joel and his daughter escape. They're able to find a military officer who kills the infected people chasing them, but he also receives orders to do something else.
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir. Somebody, we've just been through hell. We just need...
So clearly the government is wiping out civilians to stop the spread of the infection. Luckily, Joel's evasive maneuvers keep him safe, and Uncle Tommy, being the clutch master that he is, shoots the officer before he can kill Joel for good. Joel is fine, but Sarah, not so much.
Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. Listen, you ain't gonna do this one. You'll be okay, baby. Stay with me. I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby. I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby. I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this. Baby. Don't do this to me. Come on. No. 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 Please.
You have to have a pretty crazy intro to a game to get the tears flowing in the first 30 minutes. This intro is iconic, and it makes Joel into the hardened survivor that we see later in the game. It does a great job of setting up the mood for the rest of the game by showing that nobody is safe from the horrors of this new world. After a cool intro video plays, we get put 20 years into the future, where Joel wakes up in a rundown house to a knock at the front door. He opens the door to see his partner Tess on the other side, and despite Joel being a bit angry that she did a delivery on her own, they clearly work really well together and have a lot of chemistry.
Matters is that Robert fucking sent them.
Our Robert.
He knows that we're after him. He figures he's gonna get us first.
Son of a bitch is smart.
No. He's not smart enough. I know where he's hiding.
Like who you do.
Old warehouse in Area 5. Can't say for how long, though.
Well, I'm ready now. Yeah.
What I can do now.
Joel and Tess are smugglers, and they were recently scammed out of some guns by a guy named Robert, so the first mission the player has is to find Robert and get the guns back. When you leave the house, the first thing of note is that Joel is still inside of a semi-functioning city. This is a huge contrast from The Walking Dead, because in The Walking Dead, the cities fell within a couple of weeks, but here the government has been able to maintain quarantine cities for 20 whole years. I do think that it's more realistic this way. I mean, you're telling me with the militaries that we have, we wouldn't be able to hold down at least a few cities? The problem with these remaining quarantine zones is that they're completely controlled by the government, and they take possible infections very seriously. Well, like always when things are controlled by the government, there will be freedom movements that follow. Enter the Fireflies. The Fireflies are a freedom group that defies government rule, but they're slowly being wiped out despite their efforts in public stunts. While Joel seems to be big and tough, Tessa's the one that's controlling everything. She's the one leading her and Joel to get them out of their quarantine zone to get to Robert, and everybody that's helping them along the way addresses her since she's the business side of the partnership. Eventually they grab their gear in a tunnel and make their way towards Robert's base. There seems to be a bit of romantic tension between Tess and Joel, but we don't really get to know what the extent of their relationship is.
Ain't been out here in a while.
It's like we're on a date.
Well, I am the romantic type.
Got your ways.
After some simple exploration, we finally get to fight some infected, and I think now is a good time to bring up the sound design in this game. The zombies make guttural screams that sound horrifying, and combine that with the environments and you basically have a horror game. The sound when you punch the infections makes such a satisfying clap noise, and it makes beating a few zombies up incredibly fun. The guns make punchy and loud sounds that really make it feel like the noise is able to attract the zombies around you. All these sound effects make the game super stressful and fun. When you're sneaking, it's relatively quiet, but when the infected spot you and the real battle starts, the audio really elevates the feeling. Another thing I should mention is that the virus in The Last of Us is based off the cordyceps mushrooms that are a real thing in real life that can affect ants in a way that kind of turns them into zombies. So whenever Joel finds spores in an area, he has to put on a gas mask because if you breathe them in, you get infected. They leave the building they're in, and Tess mentions someone named Bill, which is just a good excuse for me to talk about the excellent world building of this game. Bill isn't somebody that you meet until a few hours later into the gameplay, so the fact that they're already making him an established character is pretty awesome. Joel and Tess do some platforming and a little bit of bribing until they get into Robert's territory, and they encounter a couple of goons right away. Even though the goons are threatening them to leave, Tess doesn't take that kind of disrespect, and she starts a fight by shooting a goon.
Fuck this.
Take cover!
Tess is honestly so cool. I would say that she's the brain and Joel's the brawn, but Tess has plenty of brawn herself. I think Joel's role is to stand there and look like a bodyguard, even though Tess doesn't really need one. Fighting humans is a bit different than infected because the enemies usually have guns, so the battle stays behind cover at a distance, so it's best to try and stealth kill them to avoid having to use ammo. Luckily, the game eases the player into the combat very smoothly with scenarios that are set up to help players get used to the controls, like the stealth kill with Tess. After fighting through a literal horde of guards, they isolate Robert and chase after him, and eventually they trap him at a dead end. Robert admits that he sold Tess and Joel's guns to the Fireflies. He tries to come up with a solution to get the guns back, but again, Tess doesn't let things like that slide.
They're basically all dead. We could just go in there, finish them off. We get the guns. What do you say? Come on. Yeah, fuck those Fireflies. Let's go get them.
That is a stupid idea.
Right after Robert is killed, the leader of the Fireflies, Marlene, spots the duo and says that she'll give them their guns back and more if they do a smuggling job for her. Marlene knows Joel and Tess because of Uncle Tommy. Yeah, remember him? He ended up being a part of the Fireflies before him and Joel lost contact. They reluctantly accept to get their guns back, especially since Marlene is in a pretty bad shape, so she isn't much of a threat, and they follow her to a base where the guns are being stored. The Fireflies are clearly very desperate, which is why they're turning to a couple of smugglers for help. And after fighting off some soldiers, they get to a safe point where the cargo that needs to be smuggled is being stored. We get a sudden introduction to Ellie, a 14-year-old girl that's skeptical about the strangers that Marlene brought with her.
Fuck away from me!
Let her go.
Something to keep in mind is that the apocalypse has been going on for 20 years, so the entirety of Ellie's life has been inside these city walls surrounded by infected people. Eventually, Joel realizes that Ellie is the cargo that they're smuggling, and despite their hesitance, the smugglers agree to the task as long as they can see the weapons first. Joel takes Ellie to a waiting point while Tess goes to check out the guns, and something that you'll notice is that Ellie trails quite a bit behind Joel at first. She doesn't fully trust him, but you'll see throughout the game how that changes. The short conversations that the two have are mostly just small talk about what they're doing or where they're going. They get to an apartment room to wait for news from Tess, and Ellie points out something to Joel.
The watch is broken.
That's the same watch that Joel's daughter gave to him, and even though it's broken, he wears it. I feel like this is one of those moments in the game that cements the feeling that the rest of the experience is going to be awesome. The way that Joel exhales and the main theme kicks in the background is done perfectly. I think this is when I knew the game I was playing is special. When Joel wakes up from his little nap, he gets to talk to Ellie for a moment as she talks about how she's never been this close to the world outside of walls. Joel is a super closed-off person because of the pain he's endured, but Ellie's natural talkativeness, is that a word? And her childish look on things seem to open him up a bit. Tess comes back and they start their trek to sneak out of the city, but they get caught almost instantly by a couple of patrol guards. Tess's bribe attempts don't work, and as they're getting scanned to see if they're infected, Ellie acts quickly by stabbing one guard in the leg, allowing for Joel and Tess to take the rest of them out. Okay, so Ellie's got that survival drive. Unfortunately, Joel receives bad news from the guard scanner. Ellie is actually infected. She claims that it's 3 weeks old and she hasn't turned yet, even though that shouldn't be possible in this universe. Joel and Tess don't have time to be cautious though, since another cop car is coming towards them, and they start their escape with Tess guiding Ellie on where to go. They finally stealth their way through all of the guards, and Ellie reveals that the Fireflies believe that they can make a cure with Ellie's immunity, and even though Joel isn't totally buying it, they still decide to finish the mission. At this point, the trio can see the Capitol building that they're taking Ellie to so she can be handed off to the Fireflies, but the path there is rocky since they have to make their way through many buildings to get down to the ground level. This is one of my favorite sceneries in the game. All of these buildings are overgrown and deprecated, and it's super cool to see a huge building like this tilted, causing weird traversal scenarios to come up. Something that this game does great is introducing things to the players without giving them a blatant tutorial, and it's mostly done through Tess giving information to Ellie. Before we even see a clicker for the first time, Tess explains how they work to Ellie, which in turn explains it to the player.
Clicker.
Jeez.
Get up.
What's wrong with its face?
That's what years of infection will do to you.
So what, are they blind?
Sort of. They see using sound. Like that. If you hear one clicking, you think
Overall, Tess is the one who's trying to have conversations with Ellie, and she actually treats her like a person. Meanwhile, Joel just sees her as a liability and cargo. While they're making their way through the building, Joel finds a revolver and the player gets to the first battle that they actually have to use their brain on. A few runners and a clicker. Again, the clicker can one-shot you if it gets too close, so it's best to keep distance or stealth kill it. Shortly afterwards, the player has another enemy encounter with like 5 or 6 clickers, so they really stepped it up fast. Something that's kinda cool is if you want to be completely undetected when stealth killing clickers, you have to crouch and only move the analog stick part of the way forward, and this helps it make it feel like you're actually being quiet because of how slow you move. Joel gets split up from Tess and Ellie, so he finds another way around, and when he gets back to Tess, he sees her being grabbed by an infected that she handles shortly afterwards. Finally, they get out of these buildings, and on top of one of them, we get a very iconic cutscene.
Alright. Now walk your step as you're going up, because it's going to be a little... So is that everything you hoped for?
Jury's still out. But man, you can't deny that view.
I'm not exactly sure why it's iconic, but I think it has something to do with Joel opening up a bit and joking a tad about if the outside world was everything she hoped. Tess suddenly seems to be a lot more business about getting to the Capitol building, which shocks Joel since their roles seem to be reversing a bit. They get to the Capitol, but when they open the door, they find that the Fireflies camping out had been completely wiped out. Joel seems to think it's not a big deal and the job is over, but Tess is frantically trying to find out where they may have been going because, well, I guess you should just take a look.
Holy shit. She's infected.
Joel. Let me see. Oh, Christ.
Give me your arm. This was 3 weeks. I was bitten an hour ago, and it's already worse. This is fucking real, Joel. You've got to get this girl to Tommy's. He used to run with this crew. He'll know where to go.
No, that was your crusade. I am not doing that.
Yes, you are. Look, there's enough here that you have to feel some sort of obligation to me, so you get her to Tommy's. They're here. I can buy you some time, but you have to run.
You want us to just leave you here?
Yes.
There's no way that...
I will not turn into one of those things.
That clicker that we saw her push off of herself is the one that did it, and I love how you can see the subtle clues of her acting differently after she was bitten. Tess realizes that with no fireflies nearby to make a cure that she isn't going to survive, so she's now a full-blown believer that Ellie is immune and that she needs to be taken somewhere to make a cure. Her one last wish for Joel is to take Ellie to Uncle Tommy, and she decides to have one last stand when a bunch of guards pull up to the Capitol building, allowing Joel and Ellie to make a break for it. Of course, Joel isn't happy about leaving her behind, but he doesn't have any other option. Tessa's death is pretty sad for me. She was hardened but still nicer than Joel at first, and it's crazy how memorable she is as a character despite her early death in the game. Joel and Ellie fight off some guards until they get into a subway station, in which Joel has to put on his gas mask so he doesn't breathe in spores. Of course, Ellie's able to breathe them in no problem, and I think this is when Joel and the player realize that she really is immune, otherwise she would be coughing and gagging on the spores in the air.
How the hell are you breathing in this stuff?
I wasn't lying to you.
Suddenly making a vaccine doesn't seem like as much of a pipe dream. They get past the guards, but nature gets in the way when they get to a flooded area, and Ellie can't swim, which is a puzzle that will consistently come up throughout the game. There are some jank swimming controls, but usually the water puzzles just involve grabbing a floating pallet for Ellie to stand on while Joel moves it around. They finally get out of the tunnel, and Ellie tries to talk about what just happened, but Joel seems to have already shut himself off from his emotions about Tess as he refuses to talk about it.
Hey, look, about Tess, I don't even know.
Here's how this thing's gonna play out. You don't bring up Tess. Ever. In fact, we just keep our histories to ourselves. Secondly, don't tell anybody about your condition. They think you're crazy, they'll try to kill you. And lastly, you do what I say, when I say it. We clear?
Sure.
Repeat it.
What you say goes.
Good.
Also, I like how he asks her to repeat it and she simplifies it instead, which he isn't happy about, but he doesn't have the energy to complain about it. Joel decides that if they want to make any distance, they need a working car. So he heads to the city his friend Bill is holed up in because Bill owes him a favor. Bill seems to be a little bit paranoid because of the explosive traps that he has around his town, and Joel falls victim to another trap which wraps around his leg and pulls him upside down. I love when games put the player in a gameplay scenario that isn't normal in the game, and this is a case where it's done great. Ellie tries to cut you down, and in the meantime the player has to fight off the horde of infected coming towards you. It feels wrong to play this way, which is exactly how it should feel, and I love the sequence in every way. It gets even crazier where the fridge that is used as the counterweight gets knocked over, lifting Joel even higher into the air. But it makes it to where the infected can't get to Joel, so you go from protecting yourself to protecting Ellie. Joel gets cut down and gets swarmed by some infected, only to be saved by a machete wielder a moment later. This armored up masked man is Bill, and he's coming to save Joel and Ellie. There are way too many infected, so the player is forced to run away, which is also something I really like. It's cool when there are so many enemies that even though it seems like you could take some down, at the end of the day you have to run. It makes you feel like no matter how good you are at the game, you still can't handle 10 clickers, so you have to run away. When they get to a safe place, Bill's trust issues kick in, and he handcuffs Ellie to a pole and starts searching Joel. Weirdly enough, Ellie breaking the pipe and hitting Bill actually helps their situation, since they aren't at Bill's liberty anymore, and they discuss the logistics of their deal for a car. Bill owes Joel some kind of favor, and while we don't get to know what it is, it's enough for Bill to take them on a risky trip to grab a battery from a crashed military vehicle. Also, Ellie constantly argues with Bill and makes jokes about his weight, and they're pretty funny.
Damn town's booby trapped. Best stay right on my ass.
Can't miss it.
Knock it off.
Before they can go find the military vehicle, they have to gear up at one of Bill's safe houses, so they make their way there, taking out some infected. At the safe house, Bill gives Joel a shotgun and a nail bomb, two great additions to his arsenal since they're both very powerful. Ellie asks Joel for a gun because they need all the help that they can get, but he refuses since at this point she's still just a kid that he needs to smuggle. I think it's pretty cool how Bill talks some trash about Tess here without knowing that she's dead, and Joel just puts up with it because he doesn't want to think about Tess being gone. You can tell that Bill and Joel could be good friends, but they totally get on each other's nerves. They leave the bunker to find the high school that the military truck crashed into, and they have to travel through a bunch of houses to get there. It's funny when Ellie once again says she'd be more helpful if she has a gun, and Joel just tells her to shut up because he knows she's right, but he just doesn't want to admit it. Quick side note, I'm almost positive this house right here is supposed to be a reference to Clementine's house from The Walking Dead. I mean, it's got the tree house, the pool, the sliding glass door, and the kitchen in the same spot, but I don't know. They finally get into the high school to the military truck only to find that the battery is missing, and a horde of infected is inside the school with them. They fight through them to get into the gymnasium, but things aren't much better in there. This is a bloater, and bloaters are like the classic enemy that gets introduced as a boss fight, but eventually when you're better at the game later on, he's just a difficult enemy. The bloater throws acid bombs that do damage at you and also charge at you to kill you in one hit, just like clickers. The cool thing about the Last of Us infected people is the type of zombie they are just depends on how long they've been infected. So runners are semi-new, clickers have been infected for a while, and bloaters have been infected the longest. Now is a great time to mention that all of the enemy and character designs are really cool, and all of the enemies are legitimately scary when they're running at you. Once they escape the school, they get chased and escape into a random house, where after Joel and Bill argue about the battery, they see someone hanging from the ceiling. Bill realizes that it's his former boyfriend, who he apparently kind of hated, but he still seems to care about him. Ellie finds in his garage a truck with the battery from the military vehicle in it, and even though it's dead, they can recharge it by trying to turn on the car while it's moving, therefore charging the battery. They start pushing the truck, and Bill explains how to use the clutch to try and start the car, and it's super funny how Ellie responds.
Keep your foot on the clutch. And when we get to
I know how to pop a clutch.
how the hell? You know what? I don't care. Just don't fuck it up.
Actually though, how does she have any idea how to pop a clutch? I doubt cars have been readily available since she's been alive, considering they had to go through all this effort just to get one car. The truck gets pushed towards a hill where Ellie can charge the battery, and Joel and Bill regularly stop to fight off infected coming at them. Finally, they start the car, and they have to drive to safety before Bill gets out and says goodbye in his own special way.
She did hold her own back there. You ain't gonna make it.
The game cuts to Joel and Ellie driving in the rain, presumably being on the road for a while, and this part is awesome because of how many jokes are put into just this one cutscene. I feel like this is when the two really start talking to each other for enjoyment rather than just making small talk, if that makes any sense. Joel doesn't seem to be annoyed by Ellie anymore. In fact, he actually seems to be pretty amused.
I'm sure your friend will be missing this tonight. It's light on the reading, but it's got some interesting photos.
Ellie, that ain't for kids.
Oh, why are these all stuck together? I'm just fucking with you. Bye-bye, dude.
The cars are completely blocking the highway. Joel decides to take the exit to hopefully find an unblocked road. When they're driving, they get approached by an injured man, or at least that's what it looks like to an untrained eye.
You gonna help him?
Put your seatbelt on, Ellie.
Well, what about the guy?
He ain't even hurt.
So these are a group called Hunters. They basically attack people randomly to try and get loot off of them. Joel and Ellie's truck that they worked so hard to get is totaled, so after fighting off some hunters, it's back on foot for them. Joel does briefly explain how he knew the injured man wasn't trapped by saying that he's been on both sides, meaning in the earlier days of the apocalypse, he was part of the Hunters. The fact that Ellie always pushes Joel for information about his past and gets shut down is pretty funny. Like when she asks if he killed a lot of innocent people, Joel just stays quiet, leading her to thinking the answer is yes. The duo ends up in a fallen quarantine zone that is now run by the Hunters, and the Hunters are told to look out for the guy and the little girl that killed the other people. They take down even more Hunters in some kind of mall, and Ellie says a line from the comic book that she's been reading, Savage Starlight.
The edge of the universe and back. Endure and survive.
Excuse me?
Savage Starlight. The comic I've been reading, the hero says after a big battle.
Endure and survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I'm reading too far into it, but to me this feels like Ellie is comparing her own situation to something that would happen in a comic book. It's kind of like when you're bored and decide to pretend your life is a movie for a second, like you're just an actor. Okay, maybe I'm the only one that does that. But I think she's applying what she's reading from the comic into her real life because the scenarios really aren't all that different. Something that starts slowly being introduced is Ellie leading in front of Joel instead of trailing behind him. At first, when she just met him, she's a bit more closed off and follows his lead, but now she starts giving suggestions about how they can get past things and makes goofy jokes like this one in the hotel.
Oh, I'll be keeping him for 1 minute. And I would like to find you.
What the hell are you doing?
Why, yes, you can take my lady upstairs.
You are a weird kid.
They go up into the elevator shaft, but the elevator Joel is standing on falls, causing them to get separated. Joel makes his way back up from the basement of the hotel, only to be attacked by a hunter who starts drowning him in a puddle on the ground. Things look bad for Joel while he's reaching for his gun, but suddenly Ellie finds him and picks up the gun and shoots the guy. Clearly, based on her reaction, she's never had to kill anybody, and even though she just saved his life, Joel doesn't offer any kind of reassurance and instead gets mad at her for staying back. At this point, Joel started pissing me off a little bit. Like, I get why he wouldn't want her to have a gun at first, but at this point, I think she's proven herself plenty by saving Joel when he gets grabbed and saving him by shooting the hunter. Eventually, they get outside of the hospital onto a fire escape, and Joel finally decides to let Ellie use a gun. He leaves her on the fire escape with a rifle to shoot down at the people who are fighting Joel. I think it's pretty awesome how they always try to make Joel try to hide his emotions, only for Ellie to see right through them. Like how he decides to reassure Ellie that it was him or the hunter that would have been killed, and Ellie understands that it's his twisted way of saying thank you. Throughout this fight, she'll shoot down on the hunters, and she's actually very helpful. There are multiple times when I was in trouble during this fight, and she would actually bail me out, and it's definitely nice to have helpful ally AI. I guess I should also mention that she does do this when she's on the ground as well. Like if Joel gets grabbed, she'll stab the guy grabbing him from behind. Overall, Ellie does a great job helping with the rifle, so when she comes down, Joel finally trusts her with a pistol of her own.
About something a little more your size.
Thank God. I was begging Joel way from back at Bill's place to give her a pistol so that she could help out. The cool thing about this is that Joel doesn't take risks, so he must really believe that she's earned the right to pack heat. Joel and Ellie get a small sneak peek of a tank that the hunters somehow got their hands on, and it helps reassure the player that the hunters are horrible people, considering they just killed 2 random people. As they continue on, this tank is constantly hunting them down, forcing Joel and Ellie to escape up into an open window of an apartment building. Joel instantly gets attacked, and while he's handling things, Ellie stops him because a little kid is pointing a gun right at him.
Joel, stop! Look.
Leave him alone. Easy, son. Just take it easy. It's all right. They're not the bad guys. Lower the gun.
Joel realizes that this guy is not a hunter, and he stops beating the crap out of this dude, and the dude's pretty chill even though he was just destroyed by Joel. Joel agrees to follow Henry, who is the dude he beat up, and his little brother Sam to a hideout so they can talk in peace about how they can help each other with these hunters. The new crew starts making their way to the hideout, and they stop at a toy store where they have to hide while the tank passes by. We get to see Henry's survival strategy of traveling light when Sam wants to take a toy from the toy store because his bag is empty anyways, but Henry thinks that they should only grab what they need because anything else is a waste and will only bring them down.
Got in this daily. Sam, what are you doing? Nothing. Get rid of it. My backpack is practically empty.
What's the rule about taking stuff?
It wasted nothing.
The rule. What is it?
We only take what we have to.
Right. Now come on.
It seems like Henry is trying to keep Sam focused at all times, and he believes distractions are a bad idea. He shows multiple times throughout the fights they endure that Sam's survival is all that he cares about, and we see this reinforced when he constantly tells Sam to stay right by his side and hide when things get dangerous. Once they fight through some hunters and get to their hideout, Henry explains his plan to try and escape the city while the skeleton crew is watching the gate at nighttime. They discover that they're both looking for the Fireflies, so it's best that they stick together to work towards their common goal, and Henry says that they're leaving tonight to finally escape this horrific city. Something cool that we get to see is a little bit of a connection from Sam and Ellie. They both seem to be pretty happy to have somebody else their age to talk to.
Ow!
Bluebird.
It's been a while since that boy even cracked a smile.
They take out the guards at the gate with no problem, until the hunters bring out the tank, which starts breaking through the gate door to get to the squad on the other side. They start climbing over a truck to escape, but once everybody has been boosted up except for Joel, the doors start being broken down, and Henry decides that there's no time for them to help Joel, and he runs away with Sam. Of course, Ellie and Joel are pretty upset about this, and Ellie jumps back down to help Joel, only for them to have to make a mad dash away from the truck to a dead end on a bridge. Ellie thinks that they should jump into the water even though she can't swim, but Joel thinks it's a dumb idea, but Ellie doesn't leave him much of a choice.
No time to argue.
Ellie!
Like I said before, Ellie is starting to finally make some decisions against Joel's authority, and I think it's because they're slowly becoming more of equals than Joel taking care of her. Joel wakes up on the shore to see Henry and Sam, who saved them from the water, and Joel attacks Henry for good reason and puts him at gunpoint. Henry explains that coming back and trying to help Joel would have been putting Sam at risk, and he asks if Joel would have done differently in this situation. Something that I love in video games is when a character does a crappy thing that makes you upset at them, but then they're able to justify their actions. I guess this is a spoiler for The Walking Dead, but not really. It's similar to Chuck in The Walking Dead Season 1 when he randomly told Clementine that she's gonna die, making the player really mad that he would say that to a little girl, only to explain that they have no plan and she doesn't know how to defend herself. It's always evident of good writing whenever something like that happens because the character makes good points, and that's what Henry does here to stop Joel from shooting him. The group then travels down the shore and into the sewer system, and they split up a couple of times to search different areas. It's interesting how you can overhear Henry reassuring Sam that it's a good idea to stick with Joel and Ellie. In a world like this, whenever new characters come in, I'm always hesitant whether they're going to be a twist villain or something. But to me, hearing these conversations just adds so much to the game and makes me feel good about the characters. They explore through the sewers and eventually find what looks like a fallen little community that has school materials and sleeping quarters in the works. Now I'm going to give the spark notes here because the lore behind the sewer is pretty cool and extensive, but basically this guy named Ish holed up in the sewer and eventually started inviting people in. They built up a community and had schools and water collectors, but one day they were invaded by clickers and they were all killed. You get all this information from notes that you find throughout the sewers, and if you want to know more about it, you can find it on the wiki, or I'm sure there's a YouTube video about it. The great thing about this is it makes the sewers feel lived in, like you're traveling through somebody's home, and it's super eerie. Unfortunately, an effect of this fallen community is that there are a lot of clickers, and when a trap causes a door to separate the crew into duos, clickers begin to attack them from everywhere. The group was split into Henry with Ellie and Joel with Sam, and we meet a new zombie type here. These zombies are called stalkers, and they'll hide behind pillars and walls only to jump out and grab you right as you pass by. When the group finally meets up again, they're stuck behind a gate, only for Sam to crawl through and unblock the door to let them through. Sam is definitely trying to prove himself to Henry that he's able to help out, and he doesn't need to be a liability. They finally get to the blocked exit, and they're able to boost Sam and Ellie out of a window so they can try and open the door, and Joel and Henry take a stand here until they get the door open. They do see a warning about the infected inside the sewer on the other entrance, which is pretty funny.
Look at this.
Oh, are you fucking kidding me? It's got a warning on the other side, guys.
So where's this?
Henry continues to lead the group to the radio tower that his group was in, and they come to a suburban area that has a lot of houses to loot. I was shocked when I was replaying this section because of how many little interactions there are in the world. I was just searching the house, and suddenly I saw Ellie and Sam just chilling playing darts, and then at the end it let Joel throw a dart, and it just felt really real. Also, Ellie sees an ice cream truck and is just in disbelief when Joel explains how they worked in the old days, which again shows off the incredible writing in this game. They get to an open street only to be sniped at, and Joel has the rest of the crew distract him while he makes his way over to take the sniper down. After stealthing around, he gets into the building and takes the sniper down, only for Joel to take the sniping position to guard the rest of the crew from the remaining enemies. While the rifle takes the enemies down quickly, it can't take down the tank that comes rolling into the battlefield. Luckily, Joel gets the chance to shoot the guy in the tank when he pokes his head out to throw a Molotov, and the Molotov explodes in the tank, causing it to be destroyed. They don't have time to relax because clickers come and attack them shortly afterwards, and Joel has to shoot some off of them. Eventually there are way too many clickers, so the crew has to make their escape out of the suburb, and they finally get to the radio tower only to find that the rest of Henry's crew is not there. Henry and Joel finally start bonding about motorcycles, and everything seems to be going right for once.
Oh no, Ellie. This isn't just any regular motorcycle, okay? You get on that bad boy, you feel that engine? Nothing like it.
Oh, yeah? How would you know?
Seen it in my dreams.
Okay.
In the meantime, Ellie talks to Sam and he gets surprisingly morbid for some reason, talking about what happens when you turn into a clicker and if she believes in God and how Ellie's afraid of being alone, etc. Ellie takes out the robot toy that Sam originally wanted to grab and gives it to him, but once she leaves the room, he throws it on the ground and reveals a bite? He must have gotten it when Joel was sniping the clickers off from on top of them, and it's really unfortunate. In the morning when Ellie goes to wake Sam up, she's attacked by an infected Sam instead, and Henry doesn't let Joel shoot him to save Ellie, instead doing it himself.
Screw it!
Shit!
Ellie? Ellie, you all right?
Oh my god.
Sam?
Oh no.
Sam?
Henry? Ellie, stay there. Henry?
What have you done?
I'm gonna get that gun from you, okay? Oh, okay, easy.
It's your fault.
This is nobody's fault, Henry.
It's all your fault.
Henry! Henry, no!
I cannot explain to you how incredibly hard that music hits when the scene goes black. I'm a sucker for music in video games, and I'm very susceptible to the emotions it's supposed to make you feel. So this somber little tune that comes in after Henry does Unalive makes you soak it in with the darkness. Henry and Sam are both great allies, with Joel getting along with Henry and Sam getting along with Ellie, but unfortunately the now duo got their recently formed friendships ripped away from them. These characters were only in the game for a short while, but their incredible writing and characterization led to a wonderful addition to the game that makes the player hurt when they're taken out. It reminds the player about the mortality that you have, and it reinforces the infected as a threat to Joel and Ellie. If Sam can get sneak attacked and bitten by a clicker, what's preventing something like that from happening to Ellie? Once we're on the black screen, we see that the season has changed to fall, meaning a good amount of time has passed. A small time jump like this makes things feel like they have really changed after Henry and Sam's death. The little details like their different outfit in a rainy environment show things aren't quite the same anymore, but they have no choice but to keep pushing on. Joel and Ellie are almost to Jackson City, which is where Uncle Tommy should be. Joel explains that he and Tommy didn't leave on the best terms, and that he doesn't know how seeing him again is going to go.
What happened between you two?
What do you mean?
You and Tommy. You're not together, so clearly something went down.
We just had a bit of a disagreement, that's all.
Ah, here we go. What was it about?
Tommy saw the world one way, I saw it the other.
How was it? The last time you saw him?
I believe his last words to me were, I don't ever want to see your goddamn face again.
They come up on a hydroelectric dam that they can cross. I also like this dialogue that you can hear when you find a grave about Henry and Sam, where Ellie wants to talk about it but Joel refuses, similar to how he did with Tess, and he just wants to move on.
That's too small. Great.
I forgot to leave that stupid robot on his grave. What should I do with it? What? I want to talk about it.
No.
Why not?
How many times do we need to go over this? Things happen, and we move on.
It's just...
That's enough.
All right. I'm sorry.
Let's get to Tommy's.
They get to a big gate where they're put at gunpoint, only for the door to open up and show that it's good old Tommy on the other side. We also meet Maria, his wife, and they get invited inside for a tour of the power plant. Tommy explains that they have a community in Jackson City that has families and had power before the power plant stopped working. They're here trying to get the power plant fixed, and it's really interesting seeing all the workers talking about their families and how they're on shifts like a normal world. It's almost like they don't have to worry about infected, and they're just living their lives here. Tommy and Joel go to check out the progress on fixing the power plant, but before then, Tommy offers Joel a picture of him and Sarah, but Joel refuses because he still can't deal with the pain of losing her. They get the power plant working, and Joel wants to talk to Tommy, and he explains Ellie's immunity. Joel wants Tommy to take Ellie the rest of the way to the Firefly, since Tommy will know where they are, but Tommy has family that he has to take care of, and he doesn't want to risk his life when he has a good thing going on already, and Joel gets a bit aggressive.
I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it.
Bring you the cure for mankind, and you want to play the pissy little brother.
We ain't back in Boston. You lay your hands on me again, it won't end well for you.
The hell is that? We're under attack. You still remember how to kill, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. Tommy says they have a big community with walls, and sure, while he could potentially create a vaccine and save a lot of lives, he's already living a life that he enjoys in his community. At the end of the day, it is a bit selfish, but he doesn't want to risk what he has for others. Luckily, their fight gets interrupted by a raid on the power plant, and the brothers are forced to fight their way through to get to Ellie and Maria, who are pinned down by the raiders. Whenever the brothers save them, Ellie starts talking up a storm to Joel about what happened.
Oh man, they were coming in from every direction, and Maria was like, we gotta run, and so we dove over these tables, and this huge guy blasted with a shotgun.
Slow down. Listen, hey, are you hurt?
No.
God damn it.
Seeing this connection with Joel and Ellie convinces Tommy that he has to take Ellie to the Fireflies, and even though Maria doesn't want him to do it, Tommy's made up his mind. Joel won't let Ellie know that he's trying to hand her off to Tommy, so Ellie gets upset and runs away on a horse. Tommy and Joel chase after her and fight raiders along the way, only to find Ellie sitting in a house reading a diary. She talks about how kids didn't have to worry about anything back then other than boys and dressing up, and you can really feel how even though she's talking trash about a life like that, she wishes she could live that way. Joel gets upset at her for running away because her life is important, and Ellie's mad that he wants to hand her off to Tommy. Ellie says that Maria told her about Sarah, and she starts pushing Joel about it, which makes him pretty upset. The conversation gets cut short when the raiders invade the house. I think Joel actually likes being around Ellie a lot, which is why he's pushing her away. When you've lived the life that Joel has and lost so many people, including your daughter, eventually connecting with people is scary. Joel thinks that if he sticks with Ellie, he's eventually going to see her suffer the same fate as Tess or Sam, and he doesn't want to stay to see that happen, even if Ellie wants to stay with him because she's the only person that she cares about that hasn't died. It's understandable, but like they say, it's better to love and lost than to never love at all. Joel never wants to care about someone again because of the fear of losing them, but isn't it better to be with them as long as you can, even if you lose them eventually? Clearly, Joel is thinking about the same things I'm talking about here on their way back to Tommy's city, Jackson, because after seeing the city, he has to keep the horse he's riding and tells Ellie to come with him. Tommy tells Joel where their lab is, and Joel explains that he's taking Ellie himself under the pretense that Tommy's wife scares him, even though he's actually decided that he doesn't want to leave Ellie. We skip forward to when Joel and Ellie have arrived at the university that Tommy said the Fireflies are set up at. Right away, Joel and Ellie are having a normal conversation about football, and I love how their connection is great enough to where they can talk about things that don't have to do with survival. They still have their horse, who Ellie named Callus for some reason. Obviously, they're hoping to find the Fireflies at this university, but things aren't looking so great when they find infected in areas of the school. You can tell Ellie is starting to get antsy about the Fireflies when they haven't seen any despite being on the campus, but Joel is quick to reassure her by saying things like they might just keep a low profile, or they're just using clickers as defense like Bill did. You can't deny the bond that Joel and Ellie have at this point in the game. Ellie asks if Joel ever went to college, and the fact that he even mentions Sarah in his response shows how he's opening up.
Ever been to one of these?
What, university?
Yeah.
No, not as a student, at least.
Why not?
I had Sarah when I was pretty young.
Were you married?
For a while.
What happened?
Okay,
Too much?
too much.
The fact that he can simply say okay, and she knows that she...
Okay, I'm about to get up and go get that lamb and stop in at the kitchen and make sure everything's okay. Have a good day, y'all.